Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Blog Talk Radio, Web Sleuths Radio, that is. My name is Tricia Griffith, and as we say in Utah, oh my heck, do we have a flippin' good show for you today. Remember, Utah is the home of Donnie and Marie, after all. But first, I must read some legalese. The opinions expressed on Web Sleuths Radio are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of websleuths.com, the website, which is a totally separate corporate entity. Okay, in other words, don't get your panties in a wad if you hear something you don't like. This is an opinion show. If you want to sue someone, you should stand on a chair and go sue yourself, okay? Leave us alone. We'll do the talking. This is a show I've been working on since the end of December 1996. Now, I didn't know I would have a radio show and a couple of discussion forums, but I did know I was going to follow the JonBenet Ramsey case until I found out what happened to her that December morning. This show will finally put an end to all the misinformation put out there by the media and the Ramseys. True crime author Aphrodite Jones presented a show about JonBenet Ramsey on the Discovery ID channel in April of this year. That show was embarrassing. It was so bad. Ms. Jones put as much effort into fact-checking that show as Casey Anthony did in searching for her daughter Kaylee. In that show, John Ramsey is credited with providing previously unseen video of the family. Now I ask you, how can you look at evidence when you are working with one of the people who you should be looking into? Okay, that was kind of a gobbledygook way to say, what the hell? Why, Aphrodite Jones, aren't you asking the tough questions of John Ramsey, like, why didn't you report the strange van you saw in the alley that morning to the police? Why did you refuse to ask that JonBenet be exhumed so you could see once and for all if the stun gun was used? You say you want to let her rest? How can she rest when her killer is out there? Jones should also ask this. John Ramsey, how can you say you got down on all fours and read the ransom note? What was that about? Is that downward dog yoga reading or what? And how did your fibers of your shirt end up in JonBenet's panties? What about the JonBenet Ramsey Foundation? You never did anything with that, so was that just for show? Why, Aphrodite Jones, didn't you ask some of these questions rather than let him give you footage to use for your lazily put-together show? And finally, Aphrodite Jones, you said in the program that a few nights before the murder of JonBenet Ramsey, the Ramseys let people walk through their house as part of a Christmas tour. OMG, Aphrodite Jones, the Christmas tour you're talking about was 2 years before the murder. 2 years. The Ramseys write about it in their book. All you had to do was read it. Who is your fact checker, Stevie Wonder? I'll never buy another Aphrodite Jones book again because she cannot be believed, in my opinion. Have the Ramseys been cleared by the Boulder DA? No. Not by the current DA, Stan Garnett. When Mary Lacey was the DA of Boulder, she released a statement saying she had cleared the Ramseys. The statement is laughable. It means nothing. And the current DA, Stan Garnett, basically uncleared the Ramseys. We'll talk about what Garnett said and what Mary Lacey said earlier in her career about how no one can clear anyone of anything in her office. Hypocrisy in its highest form. But first, let me tell you about our guests. Later in the show, we'll have handwriting expert Sina Wong. Sina has given us never-before-seen handwriting work that is put up on Web Sleuths right now, and we'll talk about that later. We'll have former Fox reporter Carol McKinley, Levi Page. Now, Dr. Lillian Glass was supposed to be on the show, but she has rescheduled, and we'll be talking with her in a few weeks. She's going to look at some drawings that Burke did right after the murder of his sister, and it's very interesting what she has to say about those. Joining us now is two people that we can absolutely believe. When they say something or write something in one of their books, it's the truth. I am talking about world-famous pathologist Dr. Cyril Wecht and his true crime writing partner and author, Donna Kaufman. Donna and Dr. Wecht, welcome. Donna, I would like you to tell us about our wonderful Dr. Wecht and yourself before we get started.
Yeah, what an opening that was. Powerful. Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting us to be here. I just want to, my opening statement, if you will, is to describe who my colleague is and what he does. A forensic pathologist, not just a pathologist, but a forensic pathologist is somebody who does autopsies. Sometimes they're known as coroners, but coroners don't have to be MDs. And when a coroner is given, which is an elected office, when they are asked to do an autopsy, often they bring in a real MD or a forensic pathologist to do the work. Dr. Cyril Wecht is the past president of all the leading national organizations in his discipline. He performs autopsies. He does second autopsies where a body is exhumed and looked at to get another opinion. And he also does consultations on death cases. He's a medical detective. As an autopsy doctor, he has performed himself 17,000 some autopsies.
Wow.
Sometimes like 3 a day. As a consultant, he has consulted on another 37,000 cases.
Oh my goodness.
He is also a lawyer in the state where he is from, which is Pennsylvania. In that state, he was the coroner of Allegheny County for many, many, many years, decades, and they have named the building for him. Also in that same city, Pittsburgh, he has a building named for him, the Cyril H. Wecht Institute of Forensic Science and Law at Duquesne University. So that's not bad, right?
I think, you know what, I think we'll hire him. He's hired.
Yeah.
He's got the job.
Well,
That is
in terms of celebrity names, let me just throw out a few because I'd rather just do this so you know who we're dealing with here.
Right.
He performed consultations and or autopsies on John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Elvis, Tammy Wynette, Anna Nicole Smith and her son Daniel, Lacey Peterson more recently, and it doesn't stop there. I mean, he's constantly working. And the job of an autopsy doctor is also to testify in court. So important is his opinion that it can send a defendant to death row, or it can take somebody off of death row. So that's pretty weighty. And then you should know he also does testifies for prosecution on some cases, defense on other cases, and there's probably nobody with his unique experience. How he managed to hook up with a bum like me, is just completely my lucky day. But we have written 2 books together, and we'll get into those later. And on his own, Dr. Wecht has written, 10 books and has articles in dozens and dozens of others. And he wrote the book, which we'll talk about first, Who Killed JonBenet Ramsey, which was an early study of the forensic pathology, the autopsy report, and the background of that case. So with that, I will shut up and let you guys,
Wow. Well, Dr. Wecht, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule. If I were you, I think I'd be napping. I don't know how you do it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, no, thank you, Tricia, for having invited me, and thank you, and Donna, for your very gracious remarks. If I were really as smart as Donna makes me out to be, after that very flowery, ebullient introduction, I should just say thank you, good night, and I'll say, listen, it's all got to be downhill from here. I can't improve on that.
Exactly.
But anyway,
and you're under oath, don't forget.
That's right. But it is a pleasure, and I look forward to chatting with you this evening and maybe again in the future about any cases that you're interested in.
I certainly hope so. Well, let's get right to it, okay? This case is the number 2 case in the world of unsolved mysteries. Number 1 is Jack the Ripper. Number 2, the JonBenet Ramsey case. So everybody wants to know about this case. Now, the autopsy, of course, big controversy always surrounding the autopsy. People say there was sexual abuse. Of course, the Ramseys say no, there wasn't. Dr. Wecht, one of the big questions is which came first? JonBenet Ramsey was found in the basement. She had a garrote around her neck. She had a bad head injury. She was strangled. Which came first? Did the head injury come first, or did the strangulation come first?
It had to have been the strangulation because the 8.5-inch fracture from the top of the forehead all the way back to the occipital, the rear portion of the skull. You can imagine the kind of force required to produce that extensive of a fracture. And yet, the amount of blood inside the cranial vault, subdural hemorrhage, it's blood beneath the fibrous membrane that covers the brain, and that is beneath, inside the calvarium, that's the bony top of the skull. That subdural hemorrhage is hemorrhage that is produced traumatically. When you're struck in the head, then bleeding continues from all of these small vessels that pass between that fibrous membrane and the brain. So you can imagine with that force, the bleeding would continue. Furthermore, a blow to the top of the head will not produce sudden death because the vital parts of the brain that control cardiac and respiratory function are located in the rear and bottom of the brain. And it is not until the brain begins to swell and compresses the vessels and pushes down on those vital centers located where the spinal cord emerges, the foramen magnum, large opening, which is what that Latin phrase means. There's no other escape for the brain, so to speak. The brain is a semi-liquid, like any liquid. When it is being compressed, expanded, seeks an outlet, and that's what happens in these cases, and that's what leads to death when the brain swells following injury and produces pressure on those vital cardiac and respiratory centers. So the point I'm making is that a blow to the top of the head does not lead to sudden death, and bleeding would continue while you are alive. The amount of blood found in JonBenet's head was 7 cc's, 7 cubic centimeters. That's about 1.5 teaspoonfuls, at the very most 2 very flat teaspoonfuls, which is nothing more, you see, than the escape of blood from some tiny torn vessels. There was no continuous bleeding that had occurred. The strangulation came first, and the blow to the head was inflicted when the little girl was already dead or dying, so as to present a scenario that would go along with the intruder theory. This vicious, horrible rapist monster came in and did all these things to the little girl, including bashing her on the head. So that is the explanation for the sequence of these two fatal traumatic modalities, as well as the explanation as to why one came first. And by the way, and I don't want to, it would be somewhat inconsistent on my part if I were to put out the autopsy report as an expert, unassailable document, because I have a few little criticisms here and there, but basically it's not a bad autopsy, and it is important to note, and it has not been so noted, that the pathologist who did this autopsy, Dr. John Myers, who spent who knows how much time and so on, and had all the time in the world, literally months, to set forth the postmortem protocol, the autopsy report, and issue the official document that he lists asphyxiation due to strangulation first, and the head injury, the fracture, comes second. So that's important to note. And the reason that this is significant, somebody might say, hey, what difference does it make? In some situations, it would not make a difference. In this particular case, the relevance, the very critical importance, the overwhelming significance of this discussion, of this differentiation as to the sequence of injuries, is the controlling factor in trying to determine what transpired, what was going on here, what was it that led to this little girl's death.
And so basically, it's as much common sense as anything, and that is the heart can't be pumping out blood if it's stopped, and so there's just a little bit of blood in the brain.
Exactly.
So the heart was stopped, so she was killed first. Everybody's going to have an opinion as to what happened. Some people think that Patsy Ramsey grabbed her shirt that she was wearing and twisted it really hard because there's some indentations in her neck that kind of match a ring that Patsy had, and then they think that she slammed her head against the tub. Let me ask you, doctor, that type of head injury, as big as it was, wouldn't it make a huge, loud crack sound, or would it not?
Well, there would be a sound, but that sound, not a sound that carries. So that sound that would have been produced by such a blow, assuming that it occurred in the room in which she was found or any other place, is not a sound that would have reverberated elsewhere through the house, let alone anywhere outdoors. So the sound is of no consequence. With regard to the other part of your comment and question about the furrowing, as far as I can determine from the autopsy report and everything that I've read and heard from Dr. Myers and from others, to the extent that they have been published, suggests nothing other than that particular garrote, that particular rope, having been applied and producing the furrowing. And of course, on the rope around the neck, what's very important to note is that it was used as a garrote. It was not just a rope and somebody tying it or encircling the neck and turning it. There was a piece of wood that was used as a tourniquet, so that you turn the wood just as you would a tourniquet. Somebody's bleeding from a lacerated artery in their arm or leg, and you want to apply a tourniquet to stop the hemorrhaging. That piece of wood came from one of Patsy Ramsey's paint brushes. So this was not a piece of wood that someone brought in from the outside. There's no argument. There can be no argument about that. So you've got a guy, according to the Ramseys and the Ramsey sycophants, defenders, and supporters, who comes into the house, and we'll talk more about that later, and so on. But among all of the different points to be made regarding, to me, the absurdity of such a scenario is that he comes in and he looks for a piece of wood, something. It doesn't have to be wood, it could have been something else, but he finds this to use as a garrote. And then we'll talk about other things which he conveniently found when we talk about the kidnapping note.
Exactly. Also, what do you think was used to cause the head injury? Do you have any thought of what it could have been?
Well, it would have been something with a smooth, wide, broad, or round surface that would not have produced a laceration as from some kind of sharp-edged instrument. There was no laceration. There was no cut on her scalp. This was a bruise that could then be seen, and a fracture which could not be determined until the scalp was reflected and the calvarium, the top of the skull, was exposed. So what kind of thing? It could have been a flashlight. It could have been the head of a golf club. It could have been anything like that. It could have been strong wood. It could have been metal. Anything of that nature that would not have cut into the scalp. They have never, to my knowledge, identified an instrument. There's no way to do that unless you find every kind of object in the house and examine it carefully and do a thorough forensic examination looking for trace evidence and so on. I don't know if they did that.
Can I just mention that there was a flashlight, a Maglite, rather large Maglite that would have matched the basic geography of that wound. It was found in the kitchen. The Ramseys denied knowing whose it was. It was wiped clear of fingerprints, as well as the batteries were also wiped clean of fingerprints.
And just sitting
the
there.
on-off switch where that was could have fit into an extra little chunk of crushed bone at one end of that 8.5-inch defect.
Right, and just think then, going back to the alleged intruder theory, why would someone then smash her with a flashlight and then wipe fingerprints and leave the flashlight? You see what I mean? I mean, think of all the different points that we'll continue to make as we discuss this evening about the absurd things that you have to accept, that you have to, without question or reason and rationale, accept in order to support, to corroborate the intruder theory.
And that's exactly right, Dr. Wecht. It's the totality, the total amount of absurd things that you have to accept. You could accept maybe one or two, but this huge amount of things that you have to put aside common sense to believe, like the batteries being wiped clean. If they're going to go to that much trouble, why leave it? I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
If you're going to be, if you're a kidnapper and you're hoping to get, as this guy wanted, $100,000 plus in ransom money, wouldn't you take the victim with you?
Yes.
Well,
wouldn't you do whatever you had to do to that victim after you left the house?
That's Donna has of course made a key point which I was saving, and that is that you've got this guy. Let's take it step by step. We won't get into too much detail. We can visit each little detail, but anyway, he's had his way, his perverted way, his sexual abuse with this little girl, and having done that, he decides that he's going to make it a profitable evening as well as a thoroughly enjoyable one. And he says, I'm going to make some money here. I'm going to write a ransom note. Damn, I forgot to bring pen and paper. Oh, and not to worry, these are educated people. They both went to college. I'm sure that they've got to have pen and paper in the middle of the night in total darkness, not worrying about waking anybody up. He's already broken into the house without waking anybody up. He knew exactly where the little girl's bedroom was. He knew, most importantly and incredibly, where this room was down in the basement that the cops didn't even go into. They searched the whole house at 6 o'clock in the morning and never even saw this room, never even entered into it. It wasn't until 7 hours later that John Ramsey, with his then good friend Fleet White, did a second search. And John Ramsey, upon opening up that door, exclaimed, and according to Fleet White later on, even before the lights had been turned on, "Oh my God!" And there lay JonBenet. But this intruder knew all that. So in any event, now the chutzpah continues. This incredible bravado just flows through his veins, and he's going to take his time. He finds the pen and paper, and he sits down to write the ransom note. He doesn't like his beginning, and he crumples the first piece of paper. He knows that one day your program and thousands of other programs and books and articles that will be written about this case, he wants to make sure that what he writes is going to be literarily acceptable. So he starts again. And we represent a foreign faction, and blah, 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 and so on. He misspells a couple of words, possess and another word, but interestingly, he knows how to spell attaché, even with that little apostrophe, or whatever the French call it, above the E.
The accent, which also JonBenet has on her name.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's right. That he knows, okay? And he writes this ransom note, and Donna said $100,000 plus. It was exactly $118,000. One of the things, Tricia, that I love to do when I speak about this case to audiences is I look out, and with a smile on my face, I look at the audience and I'll say, "You, sir," I say, I don't know, you don't look like you've done much kidnapping. How much would you charge? How much would you want to take in on a kidnapping for the daughter of a multimillionaire? What would you say, $25,000? The guy will usually shake his head. Then I'll go to someone else in the audience. I'll say, "Now, I don't know, you look like you might have been around a little bit longer," and I'll work it up. But then I'll say, "Is there anybody here? You know what the sum was that was asked for in the JonBenet Ramsey case? $118,000. That's a nice round figure, right? I mean, happens to be the exact amount that John Ramsey received as a bonus from his company the year before. Now, you tell me, besides John Ramsey and Patsy Ramsey and his accountant and his tax lawyer, you tell me what other people knew about a $118,000 bonus. But that's what this kidnapper asked for. And then, having had that incredible courage and lack of any concern about people finding him, hearing him, or so on, he leaves the house after having done all of these things. And what did he forget? Well, Dawn has already given the answer. I'm sorry she did, because that's my other favorite. That's my other favorite tack with the audience. And it's amazing. It's amazing. You'll talk with intelligent audiences, doctors, lawyers, school teachers, newsmen. And what did he forget? And there's stunned silence. Once in a while, somebody will think about it. Most often, they don't think. When I say, what did he forget? And I say, how about the body? How about the body? My God, you just did all of these things, and you got everything going for you in the world. You take the body, you get rid of the body in the sewer, in the forest, in the river, in the lake, whatever, in the back of your car. You try to see if you get any money. In the old days when we could tell ethnic jokes about different nationalities that we wish to disparage, and we don't do that anymore, and rightfully so. That was one of the favorites. Did you hear about the two so-and-sos? And you picked a group that you wanted to disparage. Did you hear about the two so-and-sos? And then you would tell this one. They go into the house, blah, 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 blah. They kill the little girl. They write a ransom note, and they leave the house, and they leave the body. Now, could there have been one of those better disparaging ethnic jokes ever than that?
No.
Only this is real life, though. This is real life. This is not a joke.
Exactly.
Well, I'd like to go and revisit the reason that this crime happened. And your take on it is so specific and so important for people to understand. And let me say also that Web Sleuths and Forums for Justice is the place to go to read up on this case, and has been since it happened. And there's no place else where you will get the specificity of arguments and solid factual information, the original reports, all of that, the photos, everything's out there now. Everything's on Web Sleuths. So please do some research if you're interested in this case, and who isn't.
And Donna, excuse me, I just want to say we're talking with Dr. Cyril Wecht and Donna Kaufman. We're talking about the JonBenet Ramsey case. And Donna, I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Okay. The thing I want to bring home is, who would do this case? Why did this death occur? Obviously, if this person, this perpetrator, had access to this child, and she went into some condition where she should have been brought to a hospital, why did that not happen? There's a reason that didn't happen. I'm going to let Dr. Wecht describe the physical injuries, but let me set the stage and say she was in this offshoot room in the basement. It's kind of this cavernous area in the basement, not the first or second room that you'd go to. And she was wearing, when discovered, her hands were over her head. She was wearing underpants that had a small amount of blood and urine in them. And she was wearing over that long johns, the kind that she was wearing earlier in the day. And she was wearing a sweater, with a white sweater, knit sweater that had a silver star on it. And she had jewelry on, and she had two ponytails in her hair. And by the way, we're talking about a 6-year-old who should have been 21 years old a few days ago. That's how long this case has been irking us. So this was a dressed little girl, or redressed, as we will come to understand. So why did this occur? Why did this strangulation occur in the first place? It's important to know that matching the garrote, the rope, it wasn't rope, it was more like a shoestring kind of cord that was around her neck. Also, that same kind of fabric was around one of her wrists. A 2-foot long cord was wrapped gently around her right wrist over her sweater. It was not there to restrain her or to hang her up by her arm, because the body would have shown evidence of hanging or some sort of injury of that nature. The body tells you everything. The body is the Rosetta Stone here. So what was the reason for this crime to have occurred? And people who want to make excuses for what happened that day really need to listen to this, because it's the whole Megillah of the case. So Dr. Weck, please.
Well, what we have here, clearly delineated in detail in the autopsy report, are the following findings, which clearly indicate some kind of sexual activity, and not penis per vagina, but rather digital penetration into the vaginal vault. We have chronic inflammation of the mucosal surface. The mucosa is the outermost layer of the vaginal canal, found in other parts of the body, but we're talking now about the vagina. Very delicate, and we have chronic inflammation. So number one, chronic inflammation means at a minimum 48 to 72 hours. And of course, when you go many days, it's going to heal and there will be nothing. So I can't be precise. It's impossible. Was it 48? Was it 72? Was it 56? Was it 83? But we have something that had occurred at least 2 days before, probably somewhat longer, and which was not acute. Number two, we have...
Wait, let me just say, there was a defect that day from the paintbrush poking her, but that was not what you're talking about. You're talking about injuries that the more recent injury was over the chronic injury.
Yeah, there was a very, very tiny amount of blood, and there was a very small bruise and a very small abrasion in the region of the labia majora, the outer lips, the clefts of tissue outside the vaginal canal. Yes, but so that was very, very fresh, and those things go along then with the additional injury that I just referred to. Now, under microscopic examination inside the vaginal vault at the 7 o'clock position, and keep that position in mind, we'll come to that in a moment, he Dr. Myers, found under the microscope superficial erosion. In other words, the mucosal surface had been rubbed away. Now, not to be the least bit crude or insensitive to female listeners, but to explain anatomically, all the women listening and men can understand this, even though obviously they can't have that kind of examination. But if you have a pelvic exam and you have a right-handed examiner, as the finger is inserted into the vaginal canal to see if there's anything that the doctor wants to note abnormally or so on, then where is the index finger likely to go? The 7 o'clock position. Just think about it. So we've got focal erosion there at the 7 o'clock position, and that's old. That's not acute. And then under polarized light, we take a blue light, and it gives you this polarization. We can see things which are birefringent that we cannot see with regular light microscopy. Under polarized light, birefringent material was found inside the vaginal vault. The most ubiquitous, universal source, likely source of such birefringent material in your household and mine is talcum powder. Talcum powder.
Okay.
You're beginning to get a picture here now?
Yes.
So
yes.
you don't have, they talk about this horrible monster and what he did. There's no rape here in terms of Peanut. There's this little 6-year-old girl. There's no tearing and laceration of the vagina and injuries in the surrounding tissues. We have these very, very minute findings, which Dr. Myers must be given credit for in locating and finding and describing. And obviously,
but let me just interrupt and say, when Dr. Myers was doing his autopsy, he got to that point and said, okay, stop, I'm bringing in a colposcope and an expert. And he brought in the kind of digital photographic imagery to take specialized pictures of that area that he then studied and sent out to other experts, pediatric gynecological experts, who all concurred with what Dr. West here is saying.
So what we have here, and then now put this together with what Donna discussed, the state of dress. You have the panties on, and you have the leggings over the panties, and so on. What kind of a person is this that, on the one hand, demonstrates such a monstrous, barbaric behavior as to produce an 8.5-inch fracture of a little girl's head, strangle her, engage in sexual activities, but then have the sensitivity and concern of leaving her in a state of undress. Obviously, these things which we just talked about in the vaginal area, including the little bit of blood, the slight bruise, and so on, all these have to have occurred. You can't have injury inside the vaginal vault with somebody that has the panties on. So you've got a real dichotomy here. You see, the more you think about all of these things, and you put it all together, all the things we talked about, just going back to the very beginning, that this person, this intruder, knows how to get into the house without disturbing anybody. He knows where the little girl's bedroom is. He knows how to get her out of there without awakening her, without awakening Burke, her 9-year-old brother, just down the hall a bit. He knows about a second separate set of stairs that goes down into the basement, not the main stairs in the house. He knows about this separate stairwell. He knows about this room in the basement that a maid who had worked for the Ramseys has stated she never knew it was there for 7 months that she worked in that household. She didn't know for 7 months. And the cops, remember, let me go back to this. While these may not have been the most experienced homicide detectives in the world, they're not imbeciles. They are police. And we're not talking about a 5,000-room hotel in Las Vegas. We're talking about a house. How big is the house? And you're looking for a missing girl? Is there a toilet bowl? Is there a cupboard? Is there a crack, a crevice, a space that you don't look into? How do they miss a room? Well, obviously this room is so totally unobtrusive. It's almost, it's like semi-sequestered, like semi-hidden. But this guy, this intruder, he knows about the room. And then we talk about all the things we've already discussed, what he does with the little girl and the kidnap note and the whole business and so on and everything. I mean, look, I don't like to be dogmatic, and I don't like to say because I have a theory that I'm right. I recognize other theories in different cases, and I acknowledge it when I'm testifying on the witness stand. I don't like to testify, and I never do, with absolute scientific medical certainty and so on. I don't believe in that, and I think that is not intellectually, ethically proper for a forensic pathologist to do. But there comes a time when certain scenarios just absolutely fall. They just crumble in the total lack of any kind of logical support. You know, not to digress, another day we'll talk about the single bullet theory and the John F. Kennedy case. You know, I mean, there's certain things that you can just demonstrate with hard science, that you don't even have to be a forensic pathologist or a pathologist or even a doctor or even someone that took physics and chemistry in college to understand certain things. You don't have to be a doctor to understand what we've been talking about here tonight. Just think about this.
That's absolutely right.
It's just incredible.
Dr. Wecht, let me talk about some evidence that some people have tried to make up. They've tried to make things that aren't there, in my opinion. And one of those pieces of evidence is the stun gun. It's a big bone of contention with me, because John Ramsey was asked by Barbara Walters, don't you want your daughter exhumed so you can prove these stun gun marks are real? And he said, no, I want to let her rest. Now, that's baloney. You ask any parent of a murdered child if there was evidence on that body, if they would have her exhumed. Absolutely, there would be no question. Now, of course, the Ramseys don't have the power to say exhume her, but they can put pressure on the police and say, we need to find out if there was a stun gun or not. John Ramsey said no, and the police aren't going to do it unless, you know, the Ramseys are okay with it. Let's put the stun gun to rest.
Yeah.
Can I start on this one?
Yeah.
The stun gun is something that the Ramsey team has said no parent would ever use a stun gun on their child. Well, I can tell you 10 cases where that has happened, and cattle prods, and every kind of horrible thing that a parent can do to a child has happened and happens every day. So that's a no-go right there. But the other thing is the Ramsey team has focused in on a couple of dots that were on her body that were basically the same size, shape, color, and distance of if two prongs from a stun gun contacted her. Well, that's a lucky photograph that they got there, because there are actually 11 of those kinds of dots on her body. They're called abrasions in the autopsy report, and they were not excised because the doctor didn't think they were burns. They were not thermal marks. They were topical marks. And so if they had been looked at under a microscope, they would have been able to say, no, not at all. But he didn't do that because he didn't need to. So why focus on these two marks that match your theory and ignore the 9 others that have, you know, nothing in common and don't fit the same theory?
Yes, these were quite, as Donna points out, they are quite superficial, and they were very, very minimal abrasions, and they fit in my opinion, with the little girl moving and kind of struggling in a way to position herself or to get out of a position in which she found herself uncomfortable physically and emotionally and so on. There was nothing at all to suggest any stun gun. This is something that the Ramseys, or I doubt that the Ramseys themselves came up with it, Donna and Tricia. I'm sure this came from one of their defenders, supporters, and so on. There's absolutely no basis. And Tricia, I would like to holler a comment on something you said, which was not quite accurate, with regard to the power to exhume. That lies with the next of kin. You do not have to have.
Okay.
Oh yeah, you do not have to have. Now, vice versa. So what you said is not totally incorrect. If the authorities wanted to exhume in the pursuit of a homicide case, they could do so without the parents' permission. But now turn the coin over. The parents can have the body exhumed. They don't need anybody's permission, perfunctory pro forma approval through the court. I have done perhaps more exhumations than any other forensic pathologist in the country. I don't know. I just did 2 in the last 3 weeks. I don't keep track, but I'm just saying that you can have a body exhumed for any reason, you have to give some reason, and of course nobody's going to do it without a purpose. Usually, when I do exhumations, these are in civil matters. Somebody wants to seek black lung benefits, retired coal miners, the malignant mesothelioma, asbestos exposure, but sometimes criminal cases. So, talking about the Ramseys. And they're running with this stun gun theory, but then talking about we don't want to dig her up, want her to rest in peace. Can you imagine? Let me speak for myself, okay? My child has been, my child or my grandchildren now have been murdered and so on, and I feel that there is some evidence that can help me find the rotten SOB that killed her. I'm going to talk about not disturbing, this. I wouldn't undertake an exhumation lightly, and many times I talk families out of exhumations because I don't think that you're going to find anything. But if there was some question about a stun gun that could have led to somebody and narrowed the field down in some way, this is something you should have undertaken. Now, the stun gun is a total red herring. I want to make that very clear. There's no, and while Donna said that, and she's not totally wrong that these could, they weren't really the kinds of injuries that I see. I've had quite a few taser cases of all kinds. I've had probably a dozen taser cases now, and I've got 2 or 3 active cases pending right now. What caused the death and so on and so forth. And what I've seen and what I've read described in the JonBenet Ramsey case, they don't fit taser marks.
Thank you, Dr. Rex, and I totally agree with you. And one thing the one thing we're doing on this show is a rebuttal of the Investigation Discovery Channel show about JonBenet Ramsey. And, of course, one of the things they talked about was the stun gun. If you go to websleuths.com/forums, go to the JonBenet Ramsey forum, you will see our new forum. It's called Rebuttal to Discovery ID Show about JonBenet. And in there we have a thread about the stun gun. And I need a shout out to Cynic here, one of our people who helped put this together, basically put that whole thing together. And you can read about it right there as well. And also in Dr. Weck's book, what is the name of the book about JonBenet Ramsey? Forgive me.
Who Killed JonBenet Ramsey?
Yes.
And that was a book, of course, on that case. And then in a subsequent book entitled Mortal Evidence, which came out some years later, I revisited the Ramsey case because so much had occurred, including the arrest of Mark Carr. Remember that debacle, right? Okay. And how can anybody forget that? Let me, if I may comment on that. I have been down in New Orleans, reviewing Memorial Hospital deaths, which Don and I have written about in our book, A Question of Murder. Donna did so much fantastic work in that case. And I was down there at that time. This was before Don and I collaborated on that case, because I was a consultant to the Attorney General of Louisiana in reviewing those cases. And I had been there for 3 days going over all the cases with some professional colleagues and with Frank Minyard, the coroner of Orleans Parish, New Orleans. And I got off the airplane in Pittsburgh. I think it was a Saturday or Sunday. I'm not sure. I think it was. And I see this whole host of reporters. Well, because I was the coroner, and I knew sometimes it would be a hard case, but I just talked with my hospital, my staff, and my home, my wife, and there was nothing happening just before I boarded the airplane. So what the heck is going on? What could have occurred in the 2 hours that it took me 3 hours to fly from New Orleans? Well, they're there. Guess what? The case is solved. What case? JonBenet Ramsey. Yeah, I got this guy Carr. And I'm going to indulge in a little bit of patting on my. I never backed off for 1 second. I have enough ego and conceit. I'm going to pat myself on the back. I never flinched. I never faltered for 1 second. I said immediately, ridiculous, absurd, and so on, because I knew. And then, of course, the way it all unfolded, et cetera. But you see, that should be pointed out too. When you talk about the Ramseys and you talk about some police and the district attorneys, the original one, Alex Hunter, and then Healy, and so on, trying to reach out and grab for somebody and so on, they were eager to embrace anything and anybody, no matter how absurd, and so on. And nobody likes that group, that crowd, that side. They don't like to talk about all the egg over their face on Mark Carr.
Exactly. They want to forget that. But boy, did they not embrace John Mark Carr. Thanks to Professor Michael Tracy, who we could talk years and years about. We were able, my wonderful friends at forumsforjustice.org, we were able to totally discredit Michael Tracy and actually, I believe, get him in some trouble. Because he put out a totally fake documentary that didn't air here in the U.S., and we were able to show that he made up a suspect, just plucked him out of thin air, and the DA was never looking at him. He wasn't even in town at the time. That Michael Tracy said the suspect was underground, and I found him in 5 minutes, literally.
And Tricia, am I not correct, and Donna, am I not correct that the prosecution and everybody, the Ramsey, everybody was accepting him. Nobody bothered to check and find out where he was on that day, right?
No,
I mean, two or three phone calls would have shown that he was never in that area around at that time anyway, right?
You're absolutely right.
I mean, just unbelievable. And that just shows you the depth of genuine sincerity and credibility on the part of that whole Ramsey team. I'll call them that team. First, second, and third string team.
I want to go back to something before we leave this topic of the genital injuries. I want to talk about and why this crime went down in the first place. I want to talk about the depraved game that was going on this child, and because and you can talk, Dr. Wecht, about the structure of the neck and what the injuries show you. This was not a strangulation to kill her.
No,
it was
definitely
a strangulation
not.
For the pleasure of the strangler. And we see this in cases of autoerotic asphyxiation where a person does that to himself. Usually a guy hangs himself to deprive himself of oxygen and get a thrill out of that. The same type of personality can do that to other people, and it's asphyxiation, autoerotic asphyxiation by proxy. So you do it to another person to get your jollies, and in this case, that was done to a 6-year-old child. And what does that say about the sadistic nature of the person who committed this crime? It should never be forgotten. This was not a strangulation to kill her. It was to have a sexual reaction on the part of the strangler.
Okay,
and what is the medical evidence, Dr. West, that supports how this was not a strangulation to kill? What happened to her body?
Excuse me. Let me just say that I'm kind of like cold water on my face, because this is something that has not really been talked about. Dr. Wecht, I know you've spoken about it in your books, but this is really shocking to me, and I think it's really shocking to the audience. And to be honest, it's a little hard to grasp. You know,
it is.
So,
and you know what?
tell me.
It's called hiding in plain. It's hiding in plain evidence, because you've got that rope around, or the cord around her arm. What for? What is the nature of this crime? Let's think about it. Let's bring it right back to the essence of this case.
The bondage phenomenon and the inducement of that kind of hypoxic state, diminution of oxygen, in this case, not certainly something that the little girl would have enjoyed. Correlate that. I wish that this were a TV program, and I urge your listeners to seek out the pictures so that you'll be able to more fully comprehend the point that Donna is making, when you see the way this little girl, this 6-year-old girl, was costumed. When I was a kid, I remember in Pittsburgh there was a burlesque theater, and when we got to be teenagers, we'd sneak in, lie about our age and so on. And, today it would be considered a joke. You just look on the street with young girls walking and you have your burlesque show. But in those days, that's it. But but look at or go to a Las Vegas show. You'll see a costume on this 6-year-old girl that you won't see except it shows extravaganzas in Las Vegas and New York and so on. And
almost every one of those costumes that she wore, JonBenet wore in her pageants, which were thousands of dollars, almost every one of them has a choker around the neck. So that's a curious thing that somebody in that household thought was alluring, to have something around that child's neck.
Well, with all the cosmetics on the face and so on, the point I'm making is that when you look at the little girl, you have to look twice, really, to see that it is a little girl rather than a midget. And I'm not being flippant here. That you're talking about a 6-year-old girl. Now, correlate that vision. People who have seen it know what I'm talking about. People who haven't seen it, I hope I've described it sufficiently well for you to close your eyes and see it before you. Now, correlate that with this game that had been played before, this perverted game that had been done, we know definitely, from the chronicity that I've talked about of the microscopic findings demonstrating that this kind of penetration of the vaginal wall had occurred. And I forgot, of course, to mention one other important aspect. A good part of the hymen, a 6-year-old girl, a good part of the hymen was absent. Now, how many 6-year-old girls do not have a completely intact hymen? And this was not a little girl.
Not from a rape, a violent rape.
No, exactly. Well, that's right. And she wasn't.
Would have burst it, but from erosion.
Yeah,
that's
and she wasn't
all detectable under a microscope.
Yeah, and she had not engaged in some real wild acrobatics or horseback riding or something like that. It was winter time and so on. And so somebody was just a very, very athletic, a very, very active child engaging in the kinds of bodily maneuvers that might lead to that. No, we don't have that at all. So how do you explain the absence of a substantial part of the hymen in a 6-year-old girl? And when you correlate that with all the findings that I have described, which I will not repeat again, and you fit that in with the whole scenario, my God, it's right there. And let me say this. If this were a case involving Mr. X and Mrs. Y or so on and so forth, I have no question in the world about what would have happened. These people, John and Patsy Ramsey, were not interrogated that evening. If you find a 6-year-old child dead in the home of Mr. and Mrs. X, in America, and there's no other adult, I'll tell you, I will treat you and your husband or your significant other to a full month on the Riviera if even the smallest police force in the country doesn't come into that house and say, Mr. X, you go with Officer or Detective Brown. Mrs. X, you come with me, and the interrogation begins right then and there before they have a chance to get their act together. That was not done in this case. Right, and within a matter of days, they had in place one of the most politically prominent and well-connected attorneys in the state of Colorado, Hal Haddon, who had been Senator Gary Hart's key man in his senatorial and presidential runs. Haddon took over, and they brought in all of these experts and so on. And
who specializes, by the way, in sex scandals, as we remember from the Kobe Bryant case.
Yeah, and Gary Hart's episode on the monkey business boat too. So anyway, sure, and that I just want to make that clear, so people thinking, gee, how come? And Weck knows this, and Big Mouth Weck and Donna Kaufman and so on. Well, these are the facts, okay? And you tell me another case where a child is found dead in a home with only 2 adults there, and those 2 adults are not interrogated immediately and separately. But that's what occurred here. And then
I need to take you back again to the physical injury that happened to this child when she was being gently molested, gently strangled for the sexual pleasure of the perpetrator. What happened to her? Tell us about the vagus nerve. What is that, and what was that physical manifestation?
Excuse me, Dr. Weck, may I jump in here too as well? We're talking to Dr. Cheryl Weck and Donna Kaufman about the JonBenet Ramsey case. Okay, I'm confused, and I'm certainly not somebody that knows a lot about this. I am confused how you can tell that this autoerotica game was going on. You can tell this by her vaginal injuries. Help us understand that.
Well,
the neck injuries.
And the neck injuries. Yeah,
well,
Don, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take over your
question.
Well,
okay. First, in terms of the part of the question that addresses a game that had been played before, the fact that there is chronic inflammation of the vaginal lining and focal erosion of the vaginal lining indicates that there has been penetration previously. Was it once? Was it 10 times? 7 times? I cannot tell you. But we know that this had occurred before. The presence of the birefringent material strongly suggests talcum powder. The absence of significant injuries producing lacerations, etc., clearly tells us that this was not penile penetration. There's no way that this was a penis per vagina type of rape. So what you're brought back to is digital penetration to explain this. And okay, that's number one. That's the first part. Then with regard to the neck, and Donna has opened the door. How does death occur then? And I said before, and Donna has made a clear point, very important, that there was no attempt to harm this girl, let alone kill her. So how did the girl die? When you apply some pressure to the neck, it doesn't have to be a circular noose, a garrote. It can be hand pressure. In fact, you've read about this not only in the world of fiction, but in real life. People who are trained in the martial arts, they know where to apply pressure on the neck, and it'll just produce unconsciousness and sometimes lead to death. There are vital structures in the neck. The vagus nerve is the 10th of 12 cranial nerves. The 12 cranial nerves are actually part of the brain. They take care of our sight, of our smell, of our hearing, of our swallowing, of our facial musculature, and showing you, for example, you know about Bell's palsy, right? So that's that's one of the cranial nerves that gets knocked out. Just to give you an idea, okay? So the vagus nerve comes out of the brain and exits through very tiny openings, one on the right side and one on the left side. They proceed down the right and left sides of the neck, respectively, and they enter into the chest cavity. Fibers go from these vagus nerves over to the heart and lungs. They go down to the gastrointestinal system and as far as the urinary bladder. It's a very important nerve. But we're talking about those branches which go to the heart and lungs, and they are responsible in great measure for the normal rhythmic beating of the heart. Pressure applied to the neck can just inadvertently cause then some disturbance, some very slight compression of the vagus nerve, and that leads to a slowing of the heart. We call it bradycardia, slowing of the heartbeat, and which in turn then, if not reversed, can lead to cardiac arrhythmia of a more serious nature, and then cardiac arrest, and of course death. And one other thing that is very important in talking about this little girl's brain also had very, very small bruising at the tips of the temporal lobes. The temporal lobes are those parts of the brain just above and in front of your ear, one on each side. So you got the frontal lobe, your forehead, you've got the occipital lobe, the back part, and you've got the temporal lobes around the ears, and then you got the parietal lobes on top. Okay? Where, when, and how do you get slight bruising of the tips of the temporal lobes which proceed forward? If you shake somebody's head, you ever hear of shaken baby syndrome?
Oh, yes,
Okay? All right? If you shake somebody's head, then the brain, which is not rigidly fixed, moves, and the part in the front moves, and the tips of those temporal lobes just bump up against the bony wall of the skull, and you get slight bruising. So now let's go back to our little scenario. The girl has the garrote placed around her neck, and by the way, let me another comment on that. If I go in to strangle a 6-year-old girl, do I need a garrote? I don't have the strength in my 2 hands. What adult male doesn't have the strength in one hand to strangle a 6-year-old child? So you need a garrote. Well, the garrote shows you that it is for the purpose of controlling the pressure. You see, the garrote, you turn a little bit more, a little bit less. You don't need a garrote to kill somebody, maybe a 300-pound sumo wrestler, and you got to get a garrote because you don't have hands to encircle his neck. Maybe you need a garrote, not a 6-year-old girl. So now let's come back to this. You got the garrote, okay, and damn it, for the first time, totally unexpected, and to your horror and to your surprise, and you can just picture, you can just envision this. Oh my God! And she's not breathing. What do I do? What do I do? And what do you do? How about shaking? You don't know. You're not a doctor. You don't know about CPR.
She's in a seizure state, correct?
Pardon me?
She's in a seizure state.
Well, she could be in a seizing, sure. Could well be seizing. That's certainly possible. Can't know that for sure. But seizing or not seizing, she's not conscious, and she's shaken. So there you get that slight bruising of the temporal lobes. And this is the explanation for the death. And I'll remind you again to repeat an important point, and that is why that came first, not the fracture of the skull with that minimal bleeding that was only from a leakage of tiny vessels and by no means demonstrated ongoing bleeding of someone who had had the fracture and who was still alive and then had to be strangled. And my God, too, look at it this: you're gonna smash somebody's head enough to whack them, and then you're going to take the time to go and get a rope with a garrote and around their neck to then strangle them on top of the blow that you've just inflicted to the head? Yeah. Come on, my God.
It's ridiculous.
Let me just make a picture of this. So the person with the garrote says, oh, geez, she's going into a seizure state or she's not responding. I shake her to try to revive her. I'm getting nothing. Why don't I pick her up and run her to the hospital and say, yeah, she ran and she hit her head? Because what would the hospital find when they did an inspection of this child? They'd find she had no hymen. They would find that she had pre-existing sexual injuries. So it became then, she's beyond reviving. Now we have to go into cover our butt.
Right.
Well, Donna, you've already got her dead. If somebody rushes her to the hospital, what if she is revived? Tell me, little girl, what happened to you, dear? What happened? Okay, let's keep her alive for a while and let's talk to her.
Exactly.
Oh, gosh.
Listen, we are running out of time. I do have one important question, and then I want to talk about your books briefly because they're very important, especially to our people on our forum, and we'll be able to put up links to the books to Amazon as soon as we're done with the show here. But JonBenet Ramsey went to her pediatrician. What was it? Something like
43 times in 3 years, and that's that one physician that we know about. There might have been others in Michigan.
Why? Anybody, anyone, stand up, tell
Well,
me what in the
his
world?
view is she had a lot of sinus problems, which is possible, and she also had bedwetting issues, and that she had infections of the genital area, vaginal infections, which he claimed was from bubble baths. He never used a speculum to look up there and see that she had no hymen. He never looked, he never took any samples. He just talked to Patsy. Patsy brought that child in over and over and over again. One can only speculate about why she did that and why her call for help wasn't better responded.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's talk about your books for just a moment. I hate to cut this subject off because I'm telling you, Dr. Wecht and Donna, we could go on forever, and you guys put it together so perfectly and so clearly and so easily. It must be just as frustrating for you to watch these reports in the media, especially you, Dr. Wecht, knowing the truth as you do. I can't imagine how you react to these people getting up there and talking all this nonsense about the case that isn't true. It just must be incredibly frustrating.
Well, it is intellectually, yes, you're right.
Okay, now let's talk about your books, okay? Donna, I'm just going to turn this over to you because there are so many wonderful books that both of you have written and Dr. Wecht has written alone. Tell us about them.
Okay, thanks. The two I want to focus on, one is out there now called A Question of Murder, and Dr. Wecht and I corroborated for Prometheus Books, and there are 5 cases in that book, and one is Dr. Wecht performed a second autopsy on Daniel Smith, who was Anna Nicole's son. He had a drug overdose death. Dr. Wecht went to Nassau. That was all over the news, as you would call, took samples, and in a short time determined what happened to that young man. And then he consulted for Howard K. Stern on what happened to Anna Nicole when she died. So our book is a study of their lives and their deaths. Dr. Wecht provides always the science, and I write the background of who these people were and why we're talking about them. That book also has 2 cases in San Diego. I must say the JonBenet case has left me permanently scarred with sadness that I never get over about people who harm little children, and especially young girls when there's sex crimes. And this, one of our 2 cases there is fits that bill. And the 2 cases are Stephanie Crow and Danielle Van Dam. Stephanie Crow was a 12-year-old who was stabbed to death in her bedroom while her whole family was there. And her brothers and his 2 friends were browbeaten into confessions, and Dr. Wecht worked on the forensic side to free the boys and to make sure that the proper person was put into jail. And that's a fascinating case. There was a documentary done about it. The other one, Danielle Van Dam, Dr. Wecht did a second autopsy on Danielle for the defense. And I wrote, as you know, many of the forum people know, I'm an independent journalist, investigative journalist. I write not only for the tabloids, but for books and for articles. But you know, most people know my work from what I do with the Inquirer, Globe, Star. And I wrote a lot about the Danielle Van Dam case. In fact, I gave one of my stories was a big clue that prosecutors used to solve this case. So that case is something, you know, just remarkably twisty. And the 5th chapter is the one that Dr. Wecht mentioned before. If you have a loved one in a hospital, especially if they're elderly, long-term patients, you need to read this book and find out what happened in post-Katrina New Orleans, where patients who were viable and should have been evacuated were instead given drug overdoses that were not part of their normal protocol of drugs and were left in a hospital to die. And we're talking dozens of patients. And the powers that be in New Orleans ignored that case, did not bring, the Attorney General brought Dr. Wecht and a team of experts who all arrived at the same conclusions from the scientific evidence independently. They had all their reports and they ignored them. There is a murderer still in the hospital scrubs down there and giving lectures on emergency medicine. And you should know about this. People should be up in arms, especially if you live in New Orleans, what happened. And I wrote this book, this chapter, at a time before all the families made lush settlement deals so they could still talk about what happened. And it is just chilling. And our current book, which is out in October, is called From Crime Scene to Courtroom. And this time it's 7 different cases of famous deaths. 1, Casey Anthony, the death investigation through the trial and aftermath of what happened there. An insider view, Dr. Wecht was involved in the defense from early on and then left the case, was not involved. So he can talk about it. And Michael Jackson, Dr. Wecht also consulted on that case. Drew Peterson and the Kathleen Savio death is another one that we talk about. And these cases you will not find in any other place. The specificity and the insider views and documents that we offer. There are 7 cases, like I said, those are 3. Brian Jones, the founder of the Rolling Stones, drowned in his swimming pool in 1969, and people have always said he was murdered. Well, was he or was he not? Was he on drugs? Was he on alcohol that night? This gives you the final answer. There's another case, which was actually on 48 Hours Mystery. They've replayed it a couple times, and it's just a vexing case. It's about an Air Force colonel, highly decorated, Dr. Philip Michael Shue. He was a forensic psychiatrist. He was in the Air Force to be the sounding board for other Air Force personnel who had emotional difficulties, and he had a really weird car crash in San Antonio. The doctor who did the autopsy left days later to go to Orlando. It's Dr. Jan Garavaglia, Dr. G, who did Casey Anthony's autopsy. She did not do such a stellar job on Dr. Shue. She determined that Dr. Shue committed suicide. The injuries were off the map of weird and outrageous. And Dr. Wecht went in there and said, let me take a look at this from the beginning, and solved what otherwise would not have been solved. It's just a fascinating case. The people who talk about Pat Tillman being an interesting murder case or death case in the military, this beats that one 100 times over. The other case that just touches my heart and I think of on a daily basis is what happened to Gabrielle Beechin. She was a 12-year-old girl. And people don't know about this case, but it really will tug at your heart and make you frustrated. And this is a girl who lived about 50 miles from south of Pittsburgh. Dr. Wecht, who does the autopsies for that entire area, looked at her broken body and knew that he would be the person in charge of solving this case and bringing her killer to justice. And her death was just the loss of innocence, not only to this little girl, but to her family, to her community, to the law enforcement there.
Donna, I'm sorry. We're gonna have to kind of wrap it up. So, but keep going. We just kind of got to push
and
on.
And one last case is the Caroline Gottbaum case, who you probably know about. She is the mother of three, wealthy, beautiful New York, Manhattan mom who was an alcoholic, was on her way to rehab in Phoenix or Tucson. She died in police custody in the Phoenix airport.
Yes, airport, that's right.
And Dr. Wecht lectures on this case regularly. And what happens to police who are not trained properly, and how that could have been avoided.
Well, the name of the two books are the one that is out now, A Question of Murder, and the one coming out in October, From Crime Scene to Courtroom. Dr. Wecht, thank you so much for being on Web Sleuths Radio.
Thank you, Tricia, for having invited Don and me. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, and I hope that we can visit some of these cases in the future.
We absolutely will.
Thank you.
Thank you. Donna?
Thanks for your time.
You bet. Thank you. Donna, can you stay with us for a little bit, because I know you want to talk about the DNA, but we're going to switch over first and talk about the ransom note. So if you can hang on with me, I have a feeling this show is going to take up all the 3 hours that we have allotted for it. So.
All right, well, then I'll say goodnight to you, Tricia, and I'll thank you very much, okay? And Donna, thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you, Doctor.
Take care. Bye.
You're just a sweetheart.
Thank you.
Okay, now let's move on. We have so many wonderful people holding, and thank you, everybody, for holding. And I'm going to try and get to them right now. Let's see. And do we have behind door number 1? Where did she go? I can't find her. How about Sina Wong, handwriting expert? Sina, are you there?
Yes, I'm right here. Hi, Tricia.
Sina. Hi. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Just hang tight for just a moment. Okay. Oh, there she is. Carol McKinley, former Fox reporter, now writes for the Daily Beast. Hello, Carol. You know Sina. Yes. And let's see. I think this is Levi Page. Levi, is that you? Levi.
I'm here, Tricia. Thanks for having me on.
Yay. Okay. And let's see. We have Super Dave. Super Dave, are you there?
Sure am.
Okay, Super Dave from the one and only websleuths.com. And Kimster, do we have Cynic? Has Cynic called back?
I don't see Cynic.
Okay,
oh, yes, we have Cynic. I've got Cynic, and Cynic is on the air.
Is he on the air? Oh, Cynic, hi. How are you?
Hi, Tricia. Great to be here.
Okay, well, I've gotten to know all of these people over the years through the JonBenet Ramsey case. And so what we're going to do first, everybody, is we're going to go to Sina Wong. Sina Wong is a handwriting expert, and wait until you see what she has done with the ransom note to show that Patsy Ramsey wrote it. Even better, you go to websleuths.com/forums, go to the JonBenet Ramsey site, go to the Rebuttal ID Discovery thread or forum, and you will see a Sina Wong thread. She has given us so graciously several pieces of evidence that were used in the case against the Ramseys when Chris Wolf filed against the Ramseys. You remember that? It was a case where he sued them because they claimed he was a suspect and he could have murdered JonBenet. So he sued them. And Sina Wong was on the case of good. So Sina, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. First of all, let's just get a little bit of background, okay? How did you become a forensic handwriting expert? How do you do that?
Oh, well, actually, my interest in becoming a forensic handwriting expert started, believe it or not, when I was 14 and a half years old. And my parents wanted me to have the best education that they could afford, just like any parent would for their child. And my parents heard about a private school in San Jose, California that had a stellar reputation and a great educational program, so they sent me there. And unfortunately, one night after study hall, there was a knock on my dorm room door, and I opened up the door, and a group of 10 girls pushed their way into my room, and they knocked me down, and they held me to the floor. And so basically I had 2 girls on each one of my limbs. One girl sat on my stomach, and she was also pressing down on my rib cage, and then the other girl stuffed a sweat sock in my mouth, and she was in charge of my head. And they proceeded to take a nail clipper, and they started cutting my nails and my body up in the dark. And they couldn't really see what they were cutting. And, of course, when you feel such pain, your body involuntarily just jumps. So at one point when I had a tip of my finger cut off, the girl who was in charge of my head pushed my head into the floor and blacked out after that.
Tina, can you hold on one second? Somebody has got radio going and is doing the dishes. Who is that? Someone's doing a lot of noise.
It's me. It's my mom's birthday. It's me.
Okay, Carol, how about if I put you on mute, and then you can do that, and then we'll go to you. How's that?
Yeah, okay. I'm going to leave in 10 minutes, just so you know.
Oh, no. Okay, well, hang tight. We'll get
I've been holding for 20, so.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, it's just one of those things. Okay, hold on, Carol, and I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead, Sina, go ahead.
Okay, and I can finish up here, and then you can go back to Carol. But basically, from that situation, I was found in a corridor, in a pool of blood, and then a few weeks later, I started receiving death threat notes. And the principal told me to give him the notes, and he was going to take them to a handwriting expert at the police station. And they were that handwriting expert was going to do an analysis on the documents to determine who was the person who was writing these death threat notes. And basically, 3 months went by, and I was a very shy child then, and it took all I had to go back to the principal's door, and I knocked on it. And he only cracked the door open and stuck his head out, and he said, "What do you want?" And I said, "Well, I was just wondering if you've heard from the handwriting expert at the police station." And the principal yelled at me and said, "I never, ever want to hear you talk about this again, and you're not allowed to mention it." And he slammed the door in my face. And so I'm staring at the wood grain at the door, not sure what to do, and I just right then and there made a promise to myself that someday I would become a handwriting expert, so I would always have the skill to protect myself on this occasion and on this type of occasion, and also to help other victims of handwriting crimes. And that's how it all started.
Oh, my goodness. So forgive me, I didn't catch this. Did they ever catch the girls who did this?
Yes, the girls admitted who they were in the end, and 2 of them got expelled only because the previous year they had broken another student's arm, but then the other girls were allowed to stay in the school.
What a bunch of animals.
So since then, I've just dedicated my life to studying the field of forensic document examination and trying to be the best I can, and to help solve certain cases like this one.
Exactly. Okay, let's go to Carol, because I know she's got a wonderful day with her mother. Carol, I apologize for the wait. It took a little longer with Dr. Weck and Donna, but we are here with you now.
Oh, fascinating stuff. No, that's okay.
It was really
sorry
good.
Sorry about the noises, you guys. That's in the kitchen. No, I'm outside. So it's good to see you. Good to talk to you.
Thank you. Good to talk to you. I knew somebody was doing their dishes. I thought it was Levi Page.
Sorry about that. I didn't know you had the mic up. Oh, no.
Well, listen, Carol, we're going to let you go, but I just want everybody to know first that Carol McKinley was one of the first reporters on basically the scene at the Ramsey case. If you remember, if you ever watched the Geraldo show during the Ramsey case, at the height of the Ramsey case, he always had Carol McKinley on, and Carol always had that inside scoop. You had some great sources with the Ramsey case. What are your feelings now about the case, Carol? Do you think Patsy wrote the note? I don't know if you can even say that. Do you think she wrote the note? What do you think is going on?
All indications are, all my sources, and I've talked to the guy who actually did the handwriting analysis for the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. What happened is the prosecution diluted the handwriting, as Sina probably knows. They had a probable with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. If they would have gone with him, they probably would have at least had a chance if they could have introduced this in trial. But they kept shopping it around, and every time someone saw it, they'd say, well, similar, and then they'd say, well, 50%, and they diluted what the guy who actually did this work, Chet Yubowski, originally came up with. And I have a little, it's funny, I went through my notes the other day. From about 1999, he wrote me a little diagram that showed everybody they'd ever checked for writing the note, and they were all under 50%, and there was one person over the 50% mark, as in 50% most likely to write the note, and it was Patsy Ramsey. He really thought that she was the most likely person to have written the note, that she wrote it with a left hand. If you look at it, it's kind of slanted funny at the beginning, and then it gets back to normal toward the middle of it. He believes she wrote it with her left hand and then with her right hand, probably. I mean, he couldn't say for sure, but he had her over 100 people were checked on this, with their handwriting, and they all had to write it out. And a lot of people did have similar letters. But according to Chet Ubowski, the guy with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, Patsy Ramsey was the most likely person to have written the note. And look at linguistics.
Yes.
I mean, 2.5 pages, single space, when this child is dead in the basement? What foreign faction writes 2.5 pages, single space, word after word about worrying about if John Ramsey is going to be arrested the next day, and bring your money in a brown paper bag, and the $18,000, and use your Southern common sense? I mean, what person says that when they just killed a child?
Well, I'll tell you what person does. Somebody who's very, very verbal and likes to express themselves verbally and thinks they need to explain everything because they've never done anything like this because they're not a criminal and they're trying to pretend they're a criminal. So,
it doesn't make any sense. It never has. The note, I think you're right to key on the note because it's never made any sense. And Patsy Ramsey is the one who claims she found it at the bottom of the staircase. Came from her notepad, her pen. Secret Service looked at the ink from that very pen. There were, I think, how many pages, Tricia? 13 pages above it, 15?
Something like that.
That had been torn out. So right in the middle of this legal pad, there have been 13 pages torn out, and then the next page in the middle of this pad is the note.
It's just too weird.
It's very strange, and I think that there are some developments in linguistics, and the folks who are looking into the case with the Boulder Police Department have gone to Quantico, and there's a guy who's there who knows linguistics, and even though this can't really be proven in a trial in the courtroom, there's still hope out that this kind of thing will be allowed in the coming years. I mean, I don't know.
So you're
subjective.
Right. So you're saying that there actually have been improvements in linguistics, and so perhaps there's hope that they could maybe more solidly tie Patsy to this based on the new linguistics. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, what I'm saying is that they're hoping that linguistics will carry more weight in the courtroom in the coming years.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So, yes, because, I mean, if you look at it linguistically, it's hands down. It's just no way. Well, listen, Carol, I know that you had to leave at 1:30. I do apologize again. We will have the Carol McKinley hour soon, I promise. I'll Carol
no problem.
all
you guys
the time.
have a good time.
And you can even do your dishes during the show, and then afterwards you can do mine. Okay?
Bye,
I just want to say, I think Carol is the greatest. I always enjoy your reports, and this is Donna speaking, and I love what you've been doing on Warren Jess. Just fantastic reporting as always.
Oh, thank you.
She is amazing. She truly is. Okay, go enjoy your mom's birthday, my dear. You take care.
All right, y'all. See ya.
Okay. Okay, Stina, we're going to get back to you, but first I have to bring in one more person. I can't believe I forgot her. This is the amazing and wonderful Cold Case from Forums for Justice. Cold Case, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, good. Just
enjoying the show.
Good. I hope everybody is cool with just hanging on because this is the first time we've done a really big show like this, and I'm a little bit off on my time. So it's a big case. We've got a lot to cover. We have a 3-hour show. We've used up half of it so far, so we will continue on. Let's go back to handwriting expert Sina Wong. Sina was involved in a lawsuit that was filed by Chris Wolf against the Ramseys. The Ramseys claimed that he could have possibly killed JonBenet. He sued them, and Sina was on the side to prove that Patsy Ramsey wrote the note. Sina, let's get back to that if we could for just a moment. How did you get involved with Wolf versus Ramseys, and tell us a little bit about that case.
Oh, sure. Actually, I got a phone call one day, and I checked caller ID first, and I saw on the caller ID it said Sydney Biddle-Barrows, and I'm like, there's only one Sydney Biddle-Barrows that I know of that exists. And I picked up the phone, and it was actually a man's voice on the other end, and that was Darnay Hoffman.
Yes.
And for those of you who don't know, and I'm sure most everybody does, Sydney Biddle-Barrows is the Mayflower Madam. I guess she's the original Heidi Slice. And Darnay Hoffman, he introduced himself as a victims' rights attorney in New York, and he said that he would be interested in having our firm analyze the ransom note and compare it to known handwriting samples of Patsy Ramsey to see what our opinion would be. And I didn't take the case at first. I just told him that it's one of the largest handwriting cases in a long time, so of course I wanted to see what he had. So I told him to send me the documents, and I would consider being involved in the case. And that's how I initially got involved.
Sina, we're going to have to jump forward a bit because of time. We are going to go right to the documents that you have, okay? Now, you are let's just get this straight here. You are a private document examiner, correct?
Yes, that's correct. And I've been a document examiner for 20 years.
Okay. So you, in other words, you know your stuff. And Sina, I've look at your work, and you and I have spoken before, and my friends, let me tell you, this woman is the cream of the crop. She knows what she's doing, and when you look at the exhibits, you will have no question on who wrote the note. And let's go to the exhibits that you have so graciously given us to put up on websleuths.com. If you go to websleuths.com/forums, go to JonBenet Ramsey, and then click on the rebuttal to Discovery ID show about JonBenet, and then click on Sina from Wolf versus Ramsey ransom note, and you will see. Now, the first one that we have is the one where you compare letters that Patsy wrote and then the ones in the ransom note. Why don't we go over those for a little bit, okay?
Yes, and I've included 3 of 44 pages, so there's what
so
you
many
see
others.
is only representational, if you can only imagine. So as a forensic handwriting expert, what I look for is how someone deviates from the copybook form. So you remember in school we had to follow along with the teacher and try and copy the letters exactly as she taught us to. And if we didn't quite get it right, then we would kind of get marked down for that. Well, along the way, we stopped getting graded for our penmanship, and we just pretty much started putting our own idiosyncrasies into our handwriting. So what I look for is, in this case, if you have the charts in front of you, on the left-hand side are examples that I've pulled from the ransom note, and on the right-hand side are examples that I've pulled from Patsy Ramsey's known handwriting samples. And the first one is the letter C, and we were actually taught to write the C on the left-hand side rounded, but both the ransom note writer and Patsy Ramsey have compressed that area in it, so it's pointed.
It's pointed, and it looks exactly the same. Exactly.
Yes, and it's pointing in the same area. And down below is a different C. So note that the ransom note writer and Patsy Ramsey have 2 different types of letter C that they share. And the second one starts with like an initial stroke, and then the ending stroke is long, and it runs parallel to the baseline if you had lined paper.
Yes.
And you'll notice that the one on the Patsy Ramsey side looks the same. And then if you scroll below, you'll see 3 different types of Ds. And this is very, very unique and important because the first letter D from the ransom note side is written in 2 strokes, and the stem of the D, the vertical stroke, is bent inward when you get closer to the rounded portion of the D. And then the second D is written more like a musical note in 1 stroke. And that
it does look like a musical note. It looks
yes.
exactly like a musical note,
And then the one below is another letter D written in 2 strokes, and how that D is written is that it's a complete circle, and then someone draws a line through it. And that's very different than the D above, which is more like the letter C with a stem connected to it. And so the third one is like a complete circle with a line through it. So these are 3 very unique types of variations of Ds that both of these writers share. And if you go to the second page, you'll see that on one page I have 5 different variations of the letter E. And I'll just quickly go through them. On the first one, if you look on the very top of the E, we were normally taught to write that rounded, but it's pointed right in the middle around 12 o'clock. And the second one, you'll see that the point of the E is not at 12 o'clock, but it's very angled. It's more towards, I would say, 11 o'clock.
11,
And the bottom portion of the D where it's supposed to be rounded is straight. It's angled. And you'll also see that the initial stroke of the E, hangs over to the left, so it starts over to the left more. And then the next E shows that, and you see it easier on the Patsy Ramsey side on her exhibits, but you'll see that the loop portion of the E is usually written rounded, but it's flat on the
yes, it
on
is.
the right-hand side, and it's also flat on the one on the left.
Mhm.
And then the second to last one, it's also flat in the same area, but it's not straight. It's angled. Do you see it?
Yes, I do. That's
So
amazing.
the one above is straight, flat, and the one down below that is like an angled, flattened area.
Mhm.
And then the one on the very bottom, the inside portion of the E, there's no eyelet. It's retraced, and it's more like a Pac-Man or something laying.
Yes, it does. Looks like same thing with the ransom note E. Exact same thing.
So you have 5 different E's on both riders, and you also see that on the following page also.
With the letter O, the letter O has little tags on the top of them. You can, like I said, go to websleuths.com/forums, JonBenet Ramsey, and you can find it in the rebuttal to discovery ID. And the reason why we're doing this is because Aphrodite Jones put out a show, and it was so full of misinformation and mistakes. And one of the things that she kind of touched on, but not really, was she did touch on it, the ransom note, but the way they ended up with the ransom note not pointing to the Ramseys was just absolutely ridiculous. And I just want to jump to one other letter. I mean, we could do this literally with every letter in the alphabet, but we won't. Let's talk about the small Q. This is something that I used.
Favorite letter.
Yes, this is one I used in the press release to let everybody know about the show, because to me, I have never seen anybody do this ever with the letter Q, a small Q. So talk about that.
Oh, and that's very unique, and it's the first and only time I've seen that, and I'm sure there's someone in this world that does it also, but it's very, very rare. And as a handwriting expert, I just don't take one characteristic and say, oh, that is just so unique, so that person must have written, this ransom note. In this case, I found over 279 similarities between Patsy Ramsey's handwriting and the ransom note writer. So
Say that again.
Say that again. Of all of them.
Say that again.
I found over 279 similarities between Patsy Ramsey's handwriting and the ransom note writer. But the charts the exhibit charts that I created for court only contain something like, I think it's 153, or I can't remember the number now, it's been a while, 153 or 253, something like that, just because the other 3 handwriting experts that were involved in the case, Gideon Epstein for Chris Wolf, Howard Ryle, and Lloyd Cunningham for the Ramseys, they had 6 months to do this. I had 3.5 weeks.
Oh, my gosh.
And I was pulled in at the last minute because, as some people know, Larry Ziegler left the case. And so I had to, and I originally was not even going to come back in this case, but I was asked to, and then these were the charts that I created, and I basically did not sleep for those 3.5 weeks.
Oh, I bet you didn't. I bet you didn't. So let's see. Darnay Hoffman brought in 2 handwriting experts, Larry Ziegler and Gideon Epstein, and then you. What happened with that case? Why did that happen?
Well, originally what happened was I was involved, and then Darnay wanted, I guess, was in the beginning of the case, and Linwood was saying, well, we have government handwriting experts, and you have to belong to a certain group in order to be able to be qualified as a handwriting expert. And, that is absolutely not true. And what Linwood did was use a very, very classic technique in this case, a trial attorney's tactic. And what you do is that when you cannot dispute the experts' charts and the opinions that they have come up with, you attack the experts' credentials, and you try to dumb down their credentials, make them look like total idiots, and then you tell a jury, you know what, you don't even need to look at their work, because if she's invalid, then you don't even need to look at it, and that's how they get away with that. And I'm used to that, and that's done quite often. But this case was a very different type of case, because not only did Linwood use that technique, he also misrepresented my qualifications to the judge.
Oh, no.
And based upon what he said, the judge granted the dismissal of the case. And I actually have Judge Carnes' order in front of me, and I can just quickly go through with some of the issues. And I go to court with Judge Carnes' order every time I go to court and testify, because if this is brought up.
let me just briefly explain to the people who are listening. Again, this is a guy named Chris Wolf. He sued the Ramseys because in the John and Patsy's book, they said that Chris could have killed JonBenet. So he sued, had Darnay Hoffman, the late Darnay Hoffman, as his lawyer, and Sina was brought into the case. It was dismissed by Judge Carnes, and that what a lot of people don't know is, sorry about my dog, people, what a lot of people don't know is that Judge Carnes only heard evidence that Linwood presented, and that's what she based her ruling on. So go ahead. Sina is going to explain more about this case. Go ahead, Sina.
Yes. So I'm going to briefly go through Judge Carnes' order, and what it says is that it states that I have never taken a certification exam, which is absolutely untrue, because during my deposition, I went through the lengthy explanation of that I had to first qualify for taking a certification exam and what was required of me. It was a two-part process that after I was able to qualify, then I was allowed to take a written test. And after I took a written test, then I was allowed to take an oral test to go through a mock trial. And then only after I passed all those levels, then I am allowed to receive certification through the National Association of Document Examiners. And so, and for those of you who have followed the case, you have to question, why haven't you seen my deposition in its entirety? Has anybody seen my deposition in its entirety?
I have not. In fact, that's a very good question. Why haven't
People only leak out little portions of it, because if they leak out the other portion of it, then you'll be able to put two and two together to figure out that, oh, there's been something funny going on here. So I finally got a hold of my full deposition. That's something I'll release at a later date, but it'll show that how I testified during the deposition that I did take a certification exam, and I'm going back to Judge Carnes' order. She says I've never completed an accreditation course in document examination. That's not true. I've taken an accredited course approved by a college in Northern Virginia that I've never been apprenticed to, and here's the tricky word, never been apprenticed to an ABFDE certified document examiner. And ABFDE stands for the American Board of Forensic Document Examiners, and that's a group that Gideon Epstein, Howard Ryle, and Lloyd Cunningham belong to. And to them, they are the all and be-all group, but you know what? They're not the only group, but they would like to think that they are the monopoly. And even at an earlier time, their group had sent out letters to attorneys and judges stating that don't hire anybody else unless they're a member of the American Board of Forensic Document Examiners, because we are the only certifying group for that, which is not true. And what they did is that they misedited a sentence in their brochure to make it sound like that. And I have, if you want to see it at a later date, I have all of that information. But it's not required that I have to be an apprentice to an ABFDE certified document examiner. I did do an apprenticeship, and I did a 3-year apprenticeship. And it says that you've never, and it says I've never worked in a crime lab. And there's nothing that states that I need to be required to work in a crime lab, because a lot of these guys that belong to ABFDE have worked for the government or have some connection to the state or government. And when they do work in the lab, they do ink testing or chemical testing, and I don't do anything that has to do with that type of testing and document examination. If it's required, I outsource it to somebody else. And I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say we kind of need to jump ahead here. So why was the case dismissed?
So it was dismissed because of all the items that Linwood stated, that I didn't have enough years in the field, and that I don't meet the certification requirements, and that I only needed to pay a fee to get my certification, which is not true. And they're stating that our group certification method is not approved by the ABFDE. Well, their certification method was that a lot of their members, or the earlier members, got grandfathered in. No, I had to take a test, and it was a proctored exam. And some of the other members who did take a test, it was a take-home test.
Oh, jeez. Oh,
so,
brother.
Yeah, of course, our requirements would not meet theirs, but then, you know what? They would not meet our requirements either with our group, because we don't allow the take-home test.
Oh, that is just, it sounds so petty and so stupid. And so this is part of the reason why this case was dismissed, when we could have gotten to the truth. But once again, Linwood, in his way to manipulate the truth, it's just so frustrating. Let's find out what some of our other people think here. First of all, somebody just sent in a question from the chat room that said, are you 105% sure that Patsy Ramsey wrote the note?
I've never stated that in my deposition that I said it was highly probable. The only person that said that he was 100% that was Gideon Epstein.
Yeah.
And I also want to mention that Howard Wild and Lloyd Cunningham make a big deal about examining the original ransom note.
Mm-hmm.
And they state that they only looked at it during a one-day period during May 18th, 97.
Mm-hmm.
And if they were both looking at it, how intense was the examination on it? Did they just glance at it? Was it like a big meeting and everybody was there and everybody had a look-see at it, so they called it an examination? As document examiners, we work on so many cases, and then years later, so, let's just say Lloyd Cunningham and Howard Wiles looked at examined the original ransom note. Years later, the Wolf Ramsey case pops up, the lawsuit.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to remember their exact examination they did because Darnay Hoffman did ask in discovery in the middle of the case for their bench notes. That means the notes from their case, from their examination, and none were turned over.
Oh, and they just got away with it. Like everything with the Ramseys, they get away with it. Levi, are you with us still, I hope?
I am here, Tricia. Excellent
Levi,
show.
thank you. Do you have any questions for Sina Wong?
Yes, I do actually. Isn't it true that it's universally accepted that this ransom note was written by a female?
Ooh, usually when you examine handwriting, you can't really tell whether it's male or female because sometimes you have male handwriting that is very, very feminine. So that's what a lot of the people out in the blogosphere believe, but I've looked at this case, and I'm a document examiner, and I wouldn't go by that. But that's
Okay.
a good question. I also wanted to let you know, Tricia, I'm sorry, was I cutting Levi off?
No.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I also want to let you know that I did further investigation, and because he brings up the issue about a female handwriting. The issue about being ambidextrous. Patsy was never, ever really clear about whether she was ambidextrous or not.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, I ended up tracking down a high school teacher of Patsy Ramsey. I hired a private investigator. I used my own money to track this person down. And I was able to have a conference with this person, and I spoke with her, and she did confirm to me that was common knowledge that Patsy Ramsey was ambidextrous. She did it in school, in her class. All the students knew about it, and it wasn't a big secret.
Really? And so you've heard people say that even in the Aphrodite Jones show, I believe they even said that, perhaps that it was somebody that was trying to use their left hand when they really wrote with their right and was trying to be ambidextrous. And very, very interesting. You actually confirmed.
Yes, so I was that was very worth my while. And I asked the teacher, has the police ever interviewed you? She goes, no, they never have.
So, let's take a moment, a breather here, and just realize the volume of evidence that points to Patsy Ramsey writing this note. Sina, let's say that you're in front of a classroom, and you have maybe, 2 minutes to convince everybody in the classroom, but you have to do it verbally. You can't do it with a chart, this radio. How would you convince them? How would you convince them that is your opinion that not 100% because nobody's 100%. That was Gideon Epstein's mistake when he said that. How would you say here's why I think Patsy wrote the note? Lloyd Cunningham, Patsy Ramsey's handwriting expert, confirmed my opinion because he came out with an exhibit stating that this is the master pattern of the ransom note writer, and he picked out a bunch of letters from the ransom note. And this is something that is on your website that I've shared a few pages Yes,
with.
thank you.
There's 36 pages of him going on the whole alphabet and letters and different forms and connections. And he states that if you can find who writes like this, then you have the ransom note writer. And I'm like, you're kidding me. Did he not look at my exhibit charts? So basically, I just took samples from my exhibit charts, and you'll see one that has no red circles on it and one that has red circles. And the red circle is my response to his saying, look, I found them, and I did it for every page, every example that he pulls up, except for one, because that one page is an ampersand. I could not find an ampersand in the ransom note. Like, where did he pull this ampersand from?
Right.
Because it's not from the ransom note. So that's why I wasn't able to match every page.
That is truly amazing. And it's just that ampersand. What is an ampersand? Explain for those.
It is instead of writing out the word A-N-D, you make a little figure for it, like a little pencil type figure. It looks like a clef note on a sheet note music. And he stated that that this ampersand came from the ransom note. And I don't know any. Is there an ampersand in the ransom note? Did I miss that somewhere?
I don't know. Levi, cold case. This is for our sleuthers to come in. Does anybody remember an ampersand?
No.
I don't either.
So Howard Wiles was sloppy with his work. But I want to tell you that I matched everything except for that ampersand since it did not come from the ransom note. And so I was able to match the master pattern to Patsy Ramsey's handwriting. So I guess that means he's confirming my opinion.
I love it. Oh, you know what? When you see him again, give him a link to this show so he can listen to it. We'll tell him exactly the time where his name comes up so he will understand what he has done. Now, this is a frustrating thing, and this is what I think all of our web sleuthers and FFJ people agree with is, like I said, the volume of the evidence that points to somebody in the house. Nobody is going to say they know exactly what happened. Nobody's going to say they know who killed JonBenet without question. But when you go with the note, that's where you have to start with. And that's where most people, most media ignore. They ignore the note now and just go with what was said about the DNA and what Mary Lacey said. We're going to get to that in the final hour of the DNA and the supposed clearing of the Ramseys. Let's see. How about anybody on our phone? Let's see, Cold Case or Super Dave. Anybody have any questions for Sina before I continue?
Hello.
Hi, who's this?
It's Super Dave, Pilgrim.
Super Dave. Okay, Super
Hi,
Dave,
Super
what is
Dave.
your question for Sina?
Well, I don't know how much she can talk about it, but I had heard when she was on another Blog Talk broadcast that there had been sort of deja vu for her, I guess, some kind of bullying attempted to keep her from testifying.
Yes. Actually not testifying, but from me talking about this case. So basically, Lynn Wood sent an email to Darnay, threatening Darnay that if he ever spoke about the case again, or if I or Gideon Epstein spoke about the case, he would sue us.
Oh, brother. You know, that's his favorite word. It's like he has Tourette's of the suing syndrome. It's sue, 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 sue. He just can't stop. Let's talk about, Sina, when John Mark Carr, we talked about this privately, and this is just fascinating. When John Mark Carr came up as a suspect, you got calls from the media, but they just didn't want your opinion on who wrote the ransom note. They wanted you to say something more specific. What was that?
Oh, yes, this is fascinating. This explains to me why people are so misinformed in this society. I received over 5 phone calls from different media outlets, and it says, "Hi, Ms. Wong, this is so-and-so of CBS or NBC, whatever, and we would like to have you on our show discussing the John Mark Carr issue because we heard that you worked on the JonBenet Ramsey case. Can you say that John Mark Carr wrote the ransom note?" I'm like, "No, I can't." "Okay, well, thank you very much," and they would hang up on me. And then the very last one was the Today Show. A producer called me, and he told me it was the same thing. I don't know if they were all reading from the same script. It was very bizarre. And he asked me if I could come on their TV show. They would fly me up to New York, and if I could say that John Mark Carr wrote the ransom note. And I said, I can't say that because the evidence and the examination I have done does not show that. And he said, "Okay, fine, we'll have you up here because we have the yearbook, the original yearbook of John Mark Carr's handwriting, and we want you up here. Get ready to go to the airport and be there in 2 hours." I'm like, 2 hours? So I...
2 hours, you rush, you get there, you get to the gate, and what happens?
I get to the gate, and then I call the producer, like, "I'm here. What airlines do you want me to get on?" "Oh, well, we don't need you anymore, but we don't want you to do any interviews for 3 more days because we're going to try and get you up here one of these days." And I said, "But I thought you said you only had 1 day access to the yearbook." Well, we're working that out, but just don't give any interviews to anybody, okay? We'll call you. So next morning I wake up and I turn on my computer and I said, "Gee, if they didn't have me on, what did they cover in the morning at the top of the hour?" And the first video that came up was we have with us today a handwriting expert from Norfolk, Virginia. I'm like, well, that's not me because I'm sitting right here.
Oh, no.
And it was another handwriting expert who on the sidelines worked on this case, and he had just been on local TV on the news stating that in his opinion, Patsy Ramsey wrote the note. But then 2 days later, he's up in New York in the Today Show giving all similarities between John Mark Carr's handwriting and the ransom note.
That is just sickening, and that's why we're at where we're at with the JonBenet Ramsey case, because there are people out there that will sell their soul, and the media lets them. To me, the media is a monster in this case, because the people in the media have been, not everybody, but, you know, the mainstream big media types, they've been lazy, they've lied. Look at what they've done. They shopped around until NBC's, what was it, the Today Show, until they found somebody that they could say was an expert, who knows if he really was or not, to say an expert, and then get him to say that, yeah, John Mark Carr did it. He wrote the note. That is obscene, and that's why it's up to people on the Internet and little old people like me on a radio show and on websleuths.com and FFJ to get the truth out. But like I said earlier, it's like we're on top of a big, tall mountain and the wind is blowing and we're screaming the truth, and down at the bottom where it's all calm and everybody's listening is the media and the Ramseys spinning all these lies and misinformation out there. You know, the truth is out there, but nobody can hear it, and that is what is so frustrating. Sina, you say you are going to release your deposition soon. Can I, you know, buy you lunch, buy you a drink, get you drunk? You can give it to me. When is this going to happen, and what are you going to do? You and some of your friends will be the first to know. How's that? Oh, that is wonderful. I don't even have to get you drunk to do it, huh? Okay.
No, you don't.
That is good. Sina, you have been a doll. Yes, anybody have any parting questions?
Yeah, if I could just jump in with a couple of quick points.
Okay, who are we talking to? Who is this?
You're talking to Cynic.
Cynic, hi, Cynic. Thank you.
Hello.
Speak up just a little bit for me.
Sure thing, I'll try. Sina, I see this come up from time to time from people in the forums. That's a question of what exemplars of Patsy Ramsey did you have access to? They seem to think that you didn't have many, and I know that initially you didn't, but later on you did. Secondly,
yes, initially I had a small set of examples, the same ones that Thomas Miller had, he is an attorney/document examiner out in Colorado, I believe it is. But in the end, Lloyd Cunningham, Howard Wiles, Gideon Epstein, and I all worked from the same set of documents. So we had the exemplars, which are the known handwriting samples of Patsy Ramsey. I think it was like 5 sessions that she did for the Colorado Bureau of Investigators. And then Linwood also came up with some additional handwriting samples that were like everyday business type documents that I guess the Ramseys turned over to Linwood to give to us. So it doesn't matter that Lloyd Cunningham and Howard Wiles had examined the original ransom note, because when it came to using the known handwriting samples of Patsy Ramsey, they too only had photocopies. And then it doesn't help you if you're not comparing original question document to original known samples to look for pressure patterns and line quality. If one of the sets is a photocopy, then it really doesn't matter whether you looked at the original or not. And it doesn't matter which handwriting group you belong to, as long as you're certified and you can show that you have continuing education. And even Gideon Epstein was stating that you had to be an American Board of Forensic Document Examiner member, and as of a few years ago, he left the group. So what does that make him now?
I know. I guess he's not official anymore. I guess, since you weren't.
According to what he said in this trial, that's for sure.
So since you're not in that group, now he's not, so therefore you can't, you're not official. Brother. Okay, and go ahead, Cynic, you had another question.
Yep, one last point, and it's something, again, I'm just raising points that I've seen come up from time to time because I had a thread that displayed actually your letters, and these are issues that have come up from posters from time to time. The second common one that I've seen is that they seem to say that, sure, you've seen all these similarities, but you didn't properly consider the differences, which I know is not true. But I just like to hear your comment on that.
Yes. What Howard Wiles and Lloyd Cunningham are stating as differences in this case are actually variations. And Lloyd Cunningham's exhibits, his master pattern exhibit, which a few of those pages are on the Web Sleuth forum, actually show the variation. So they're talking out of one side of their mouth but then saying something else out of the other. And I did take into consideration some differences because sometimes there's something called a one-time variation. And we're dealing with someone who's writing with an opposite hand here. They're non-dominant hand, writing the ransom note. So you are going to get some really strange and bizarre letter formations every once in a while. The reason why I did not do a chart on differences is because I had three and a half weeks to crank out these exhibits. All 44 pages, to do a report, do all this. There was no time for me to do anything else because I was brought in so late to do this.
Interesting. Okay, before we let Sina go, anybody else want to jump in with a question or a comment?
Yeah, I would. This is Donna. Hi, Sina.
Hi, Donna. Good to hear
you. And what a story you told about how you got into the business. I'm just wondering if perhaps the Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey false start note might have had the ampersand on it. I don't have it in front of me, so I don't know.
Oh, that's a good point. You know what? I don't have that in front of me, too, but, boy, that's a great idea.
Or maybe it didn't. Maybe it's just more, artifact that someone was making up. But but I just want to say, there are many, many reasons to hire a document examiner, from fraud to wills to checks that are written on your account, identity issues. You cannot do better than to consult with Sina Wong. She's just world class.
Absolutely, I agree 100%. And Sina,
thank you, Donna.
On that lovely note, I want to say thank you again for entrusting those documents, those handwriting comparisons of Patsy Ramsey's that you gave to us on Web Sleuths. We'll also put them on FFJ. Websleuths.com, go to the JonBenet Ramsey forum, and you'll be able to see exactly what we're talking about. Sina Wong, I'm going to hold you to that deposition. When you get ready to release it, I'm right here, okay?
Oh, very good. And I hope to release the rest of my exhibits someday because I think it's going to blow everybody's mind when they see it.
I can't wait. Let's rock this boat and get something going, okay?
Very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sina. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Okay, wow, we are going into the third hour. Web Sleuths Radio has never gone on this long before, and everybody is still sticking around and chat. That's great. So now we're going to get to some real, everything is meat and potatoes that we're doing. But there are two things out there that the media has turned into fact, and that everybody who thinks there was an intruder holds on to. Those two things are, what about the DNA? What about the new DNA that they have found of the intruder? And didn't the Boulder District Attorney clear the Ramseys? We're going to clear up that mess right this very second. Now, Donna Kaufman is a true crime author. She's written a bunch of books, several of them with Dr. Cyril Wecht, and we have some great people on our other side too. Levi Page, who knows this case inside and out. We have Super Dave from our forum, who is a master at the facts and what is going on with this case. Cynic is here as well. Cynic's mind is like one I have never seen before. He can remember everything, and he has a science background. Let's see, we have Cold Case, who once again, you can ask her what happened on a certain day, certain time, and boom, it's right there. She'll know exactly what it is. Cold Case posts on both of our forums, websleuths.com and FFJ. Have I left anybody out? I don't think so. Okay, we're going to talk about the DNA now. And Donna, I want to go to you first. Tell us a little bit about how you know about the DNA and why your explanation is one that's logical and we should believe.
Well, I have to quote Dr. Henry Lee, who has told me on many occasions, and we on occasion have delivered speeches to the same group on this topic, and I know him outside of academia, and he says DNA is a significant factor in 30% of homicides, and the Ramsey case is not one of them.
Now, we all know who Dr. Lee is, Dr. Henry Lee.
Yeah, Dr. Henry
famous.
Lee has, like Dr. West, has a university named for him at New Haven University, the Henry Lee School of Forensic Science. And he is a master criminalist, and he's really in a category of his own worldwide. So he consulted on this case. He came into the case by invitation about 6 weeks in, studied the information, and was with the case through when the grand jury declined to vote. He told the Alex Hunter, who was then the DA, you don't have enough of a case here. You cannot ask them to vote for grand jury. Don't get a vote for them because you don't want to have to go forward with the case. You will end up losing. So, and the DNA has not gotten any better over the years. It's just been a bone of contention from the Ramsey supporters who try to say, oh, that's DNA in the underpants and the DNA. And then they came up with this ludicrous thing that Mary Lacey, who took over for Hunter after he left, who was a sex crimes investigator, prosecutor in her early career, so shame on her. So she was the one who cleared the Ramseys because she got this bee in her bonnet that there was that the foreign DNA was something that could be sent through CODIS, which is the federal database that all police departments link to. So she started this process by which is continuing now, as far as I know, where every week they send through on the computer the same 9 markers, where it really takes 13 markers to find a reasonable suspect pool. So she sends in the damaged the 9 markers into CODIS, and it brings back I don't know how many possible people, but from there they never whittle it down to people. Let me tell you, there are, last I counted, 6.9 billion people on this planet, and if you send through a faulty DNA marker request, you're going to get maybe hundreds of millions in your suspect pool. What good is that? Are you going to start asking all those people how where were they on that day in question and what's their handwriting look like? So it's ludicrous. It's busy work. And by the way, this new DA, Garnett, and Mark Beckner, who has the case back, he's the police chief, that the case was yanked from him for a while and he has it back now. They have never consulted with Henry Lee again about any current issues in the case. And there's nobody who has a better lock on the forensic evidence in this case than Henry Lee. So they're not really trying to solve this case because, they know better.
Exactly. Let's talk about, here's the thing. We need to talk about the DNA because this is important, because I want this show to be the solid block of information that everybody can go to when all that media crap is out there and you want the real truth. But, you talk about DNA and markers and 9 and 13. I'm just a simple country girl from Utah. How does this work? Let's talk about, when you think of DNA, you think of flesh and blood. There was no flesh. There was no blood. This is an artifact, from what I understand, of just DNA that is floating around in the world. If we took, clippings from our fingernails and looked at our underpants, we would find foreign DNA all over the place. Then it could fly off and be on our clothes. Am I mistaken? Is that right?
No, you touch another person, all of a sudden they have your DNA on you. Even if you don't have sex, you don't have any kind of intimate connection with them. You touch their skin, your DNA is on them. That's how flighty it is.
And that's what they're talking about here.
In the case of the Ramseys, they found in the underwear, which was too large for her, as you've discussed many times, and there's some great demonstrations of that underwear hoax on your website, Sleuth site, there was foreign DNA under the blood, and it was a really bad sample. DNA can survive laundering, but it gets broken down, and on top of that DNA in the underpants was robust sample of blood. So that blood was fresh. The DNA was not. So where did that DNA came from? Who knows? It could have been from somebody packaging the underpants when they were manufactured in Asia. Henry Lee bought a package of the same underwear at the same Bloomingdale's and opened it and tested it and found DNA was in the inside crotch of all the underpants. So someone over there has a runny, leaky nose, or, a piece of dandruff could have gotten in the, who knows? You just touch it there and you're giving DNA. So it's a complete hoax.
Let's keep it right there. A piece of dandruff could have fallen in. That is the DNA. Now, I would like to go to Cynic. Cynic is someone I've gotten to know over the past little bit, and I'm telling you, Cynic's mind, we need to make him king of the world, because the world will be in shape as soon as Cynic took over. Cynic, you heard Donna describe it. How would you describe the DNA? You and I have talked about this. How can we describe it so people like me can really understand it and grasp the fact that this DNA means absolutely nothing? Cynic, are you there?
Yes.
Okay.
Just your question. Well, you have to keep in mind that the DNA that was the best DNA they have in this case is the DNA that was found in the panties. That DNA came in at 9 markers, and you need 10 markers in order to have it entered into the CODIS database, the FBI database. So what happened is a bit of a mystery, because, as we say, we have a sample of 9 markers, and then all of a sudden it ends up in CODIS. I guess the question I have is what specifically happened? We don't have an answer for that. It's possible that because they wanted to get it in there so badly that they made it happen, and I'll just leave it at that. But as it stands, that was initially just a 9 marker profile. As I say, you do need 10.
And even 10 isn't very.
No, 10 is still a partial profile.
It's nothing.
You need 13 markers to constitute a full profile. And that's typically, say for example, if you go in and have your DNA voluntarily taken, and everything's perfect, you have a nice buccal swab of your DNA from your cheek, that will produce a 13 marker profile, and that's a perfect profile. So you see that all we have in this case are partial profiles. And the other DNA in this case, the DNA from the touch DNA process, which was given to us by Bodhi Labs, we were never told how many markers there were in that sample, ever.
Exactly,
So
or how big it was, or what kind it was.
Exactly. We may just have, we may have 2 markers, we may have 3 markers, we may have 6, we may have 7. We're just simply not told. And, if they were so confident in that DNA, I would imagine they would have shouted out from the rooftops, hey, we've got a 13 marker full profile.
I don't think it hasn't been requested.
I believe it has. And here's the thing, my friends. Why didn't Aphrodite Jones bring this up? Why hasn't any other reporter, when they talk about the DNA cleared the Ramseys, why haven't they just gone and opened up a book or gone online or called up Henry Lee's school or done something? Because they're lazy, and because they are so lazy and don't care anymore, because they're out to make a buck and not get to the truth. Again, it's left up to people like us to try and get the truth out there. Cynic, you mentioned something, and this just stuck with me, about 30 skin cells. You'd need about 30 skin cells to get 10 markers. Am I right, or am I off base here?
You need 30. You need a minimum of 30 skin cells typically to be able to get a decent profile.
Of 13.
Yeah, typically, yes. You know, that's the kind of level that you'd be looking at to get potentially, you know, a full profile, unless that was subject to things that could potentially degrade that, such as bacteria, et cetera. So, you know, there's some other factors present there, but just if you have, you know, 30 cells that was run through the DNA process, typically that's sufficient to get a full profile. Assuming that DNA was not degraded or affected by some other factors.
Right, and so let's put this into perspective. 30 cells to get a good 13 markers that could be used in a court case. 30 cells. Approximately 10,000 cells can fit on a pinhead. Okay, that's the type of size of skin cell we're talking about. They didn't even have that much apparently to get a good enough sample to get the DNA up to 13 markers. Donna Kaufman, let me ask you something. First of all, I want to jump in. Does any of our panel, I'll call you our panel, how's that, our JonBenet Ramsey panel. Let's make it official. We'll give you a title. You can brag about it later. Does our JonBenet panel have any questions so far about the DNA?
Hey, this is Super Dave.
Super Dave, go for it.
Well, it's not really a question, but earlier in the show we mentioned the debacle that Mary Lacey gave us with John Mark Carr and all the various people who were involved in that. But one of the more inane things, let's put it that way, is I've heard people say, why didn't they just go forward against him anyway when the DNA didn't match him? I mean, if it's as worthless as we've made it out tonight. And, you know, the simple answer to that, and anyone who's followed this case for a while knows this, is because they couldn't do that. And I'm convinced that they would have tried if they could have.
Yes.
But, you know, Mary Lacey, Lynn Wood, all these, Michael Tracy, all these people, that's the basis for their belief in an intruder, if they're even after an intruder. I'm not even sure that's the case, but pardon my rambling a little bit. But, you know, so they're pretty much locked in. They've bricked themselves into a corner so that at the point now, if a suspect does come along and with no alibi, you know, inconsistent stories, a handwriting match, like stronger than the one we already have, but we already went through that. If his DNA doesn't come back a match, that's it, man. Game over. He's cut loose. Guilty as hell, free as a bird. Ain't America great?
Yeah, you know what? You're absolutely right. Donna, don't you agree?
Yeah, very well said, very well said. They've dirtied the water so much. It's kind of what happened to the JFK investigation, too. There's so much noise on the graph that you cannot get a good reading, and any prosecutor cannot take a case to trial unless it's winnable. That's why you have the grand jury system to kind of be the bellwether. But you just hit on something, and I just happen to have this quote right here. When Mary Lacey brought back John Mark Carr from Thailand, and the underpants DNA excluded him as being the perp, she publicly stated, quote, the DNA could be an artifact. It isn't necessarily the killers. There's a probability that it's the killers, but it could be something else. She added, no one is really cleared of a homicide until there's a conviction in court beyond a reasonable doubt. And I don't think you will get any prosecutor unless they were present with the person at the time of the crime to clear someone.
I was going to read that, but thank you, Donna. What the hell?
Excuse me.
So, yeah. I mean...
Sorry, this is...
Super Dave, go ahead.
Super Dave again. Yeah, that's pretty much what I was trying to say there. I mean, you know, she said that, obviously it's sort of CYA time. We all know what that means. I'm convinced that she was, at that point, considering going after him anyway, you know, because he was the perfect patsy, no pun intended there.
Yeah.
But, you know, by that time, the game was over. His story had been exposed many times as being a fraud, that he was just a freak out for attention. Yeah. None of the other things that he supposedly knew were of any value at all. And, you know, pretty much a first-year law student would have known better than to do this.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
so
I think we're wasting any time to even give this guy the satisfaction of talking about him, because he's an egomaniac that thrives on being a false confessor and a dope And let's talk about some real issues, if I might. I'd like to mention about the Touch DNA, because the Touch DNA is this Bodie lab came up with this, or were asked to do this test, and they found out, and they said, oh, this is a brand new technique. Well, I'm sorry, for 10 years before that, FBI lab and Quantico and other labs have used Touch DNA to capture skin cells from the inside of masks or from gloves or from guns or knives, so it's not new at all. As Cynic said, they won't offer their proof, even though it has been officially requested. They also have said the mystery man's DNA is on the waistband of the Long Johns. Now, so is Patsy, who got the girl dressed. So is John, who took his hands. Remember when he carried her out of the basement, he had both hands. She was a vertical plank, essentially. He had his hands, he didn't cradle her like a doll, a stiff doll, albeit. He put his two hands on that waistband and carried her up the stairs and put her down on the floor with his hands on that same area. Where's the family DNA? And by the way, where is the DNA on her underpants? Now, did this mysterious donor say, okay, I'm taking down your long johns, but you take down your underpants?
Exactly.
I mean, you know, these guys like the stun gun stuff all over. They focus on some tiny little thing, hoping that they'll get away with it. And, you know, they're pretty successful in doing that, I must say.
They have been very successful. And, again, this is why we're doing the show about the JonBenet Ramsey case, because of all the misinformation out there. And if you look at all the information just that we've talked about tonight, common sense will tell you that there was not an intruder. We can always go back to the DNA. We have a little time, but I want to talk a little bit about this so-called exoneration. Now, as Donna read, that Mary Lacey earlier said that, you know, nobody can exonerate anybody unless it's in a court of law, unless it's a trial. And then, boom, she turns around and exonerates the Ramseys. Now, on a radio show with Dan Kaplis and Craig Silverman, Stan Garnett, the new DA, was asked about this, and what he said was, what I've always said about Mary Lacey's exoneration is that it speaks for itself. I've made it clear that any decisions made going forward about the Ramsey case will be based off the evidence. I'm sorry, that's a polite way of saying, Mary Lacey, take your exoneration and stick it. It means nothing. And by the way, at the beginning, when she gave this exoneration, the media treated it properly, like it was a joke. You know, they didn't give it any weight. They never said, well, this is, you know, the Ramseys are clear. They always went back to, well, you know, people said that Patsy wrote the note and blah, blah, blah. They treated it properly. It's evolved into this urban legend now that they are absolutely, totally cleared. And here we have Stan Garnett. He could have said, well, yes, I agree, we're not looking at the Ramseys. He chose not to. He was very correct, politically correct, doing that Linwood tap dance that he makes everybody do, so he won't sue them. And he's saying, that speaks for itself. At the time when he said that, people were saying this is just a ridiculous thing for her to do. Nobody was agreeing with it. And so basically he's saying it speaks for itself, and I'm just going to follow the evidence. And I'm sorry I don't even care if he comes back and says, well, what I really meant was, you know, I've exonerated the Ramseys. He hasn't come out and said that. He was saying it right there. You have to read just a little bit between the lines, because if the Ramseys were really exonerated, he would have said so. So when they say, people, listen to me, when you hear that the Ramseys have been cleared, that's absolutely not true whatsoever. Okay, we've got some great people on the line. We have just a little bit of time left. I want to go to them. Donna, you'll stay with us, right?
Sure.
Okay, great. We have some people that are legendary in the JonBenet Ramsey discussion, and I just want to say hi to them and give them a chance to speak. And one of those people is Cold Case. Cold Case, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, a lot of you have followed Cold Case on forumsforjustice.org, and when Cold Case gets a hold of something and analyzes it and takes it apart, it is truly amazing. And Cold Case, I'm putting you on the spot here, but what would you like to say? What would you like to add? Do you agree with everything? Do you disagree? What are your thoughts?
Well, that's pretty open-ended.
There you go.
First of all, as I say in my tag on Forms for Justice, I don't believe by law Mary Lacey has any legal ability to exonerate anyone without a trial, even in a trial. It's not her, wasn't her position. And that would be up to a judge or jury. Don't know where she got her frame of reference from, except, you know, that seemed to be her purpose before leaving office.
It was to give her that, give the Ramseys that gift.
Yes, it was pretty disgusting, but at this point, disgusting is par for the course in this case.
Exactly. There's absolutely nothing you can do about it. So are you going to stick with this case? Are you going to continue on and help us carry through and try and shout the truth out on the tops of mountains?
Well, of course. I've only spent 10 plus years working it, so
you're going to keep
hard
doing
to give up now. But
yeah,
I do want to
absolutely.
say there is one piece of evidence, and I want to ask you this, Donna, and with all due respect to you and to Dr. Lee, it is a point that has driven me crazy ever since Steve Thomas was, you know, the sole person who brought this information to light for us. Wrote about it, but it boggles my mind. I want to ask about the, you said Dr. Lee said, you know, you can't, he told Hunter you can't prosecute this because you can't win. But why did not Dr. Lee not ask Hunter why he never subpoenaed the Ramsey phone records? What elementary investigative procedure is getting the phone records by subpoena of the family who own the house, who are the family of the murder victim, found in the basement in such a condition? How did that happen? And why would Dr. Lee, who is advising...
It's an excellent question. I've seen you, as a poster, I've seen you mention this before, and you are so sharp and such a... devoted poster. I have great admiration for your thinking process. All I can say is I don't have the answer, but I can't believe that it wasn't done. Steve Thomas left the case very early, and he was not privy to a lot that went on. So I wouldn't take just his saying it as, you know, that's not saying anything against him. I'm just saying he may not know, because it's so pro forma in any investigation. That's what you do. It takes a time to get those things, as we learned from the Casey Anthony case. It takes a long time before the courts will allow you to get that information. So because it didn't happen on his watch, now again, maybe he has had friends still within the investigation who said, yes, we're still waiting, never happened. But until it goes to court,
yeah.
It's one of those things that we just can't know.
Well, Thomas was on the case for a year and a half, and he was one of the lead detectives, and he did have that information close at hand because it was a thorn in his side, so much that he wrote about it. What DA prevents an investigative team in a child murder from getting something so basic? And the Team Ramsey's excuse is always, oh, well, the Ramseys chose to later hand over phone records, which they chose what records to hand over. And Thomas wrote that he got a copy of the month of December, and when he went to get it, the guy said, well, we wondered, you know, who worked for the cell phone company, said, we wondered when you were coming. And this was a year after the murder. And the record was for a cell phone, and for December only, it was blank. He did ask the guy, can you tell me if there were any, he couldn't even see the months before of the phone. He said, would you tell me, were there calls in the months before? And the person said, I'll tell you yes on that. Now, think about this. If Team Ramsey wanted to find this killer, Patsy Ramsey claimed in her 1998 interview with the DA, Detective Haney, when she was asked about their cell phones, she went through this long, rambling, completely obvious story that she was making up, in my opinion, about how this particular cell phone had been lost by John Ramsey, and well, she had bought another one, and then she decided it was so cute she was going to keep it because John found it when it was, charging. It was absolutely absurd. And, you have to say, well, okay, you're looking for the person who killed your child. With all these world-class investigators the Ramseys never quit talking about, nobody thinks, well, what if the killer found that phone? What if the killer stole that phone? That could be a link. Why would they not be, investigating that themselves? There's just so many things wrong with this story.
The physical phone doesn't give you much. It's the phone records, as you said, that really are the important part, and to me it's just not knowable. My contacts aren't good enough inside that investigation to give an answer, and I'd like to know. You're absolutely right, but I have a couple of cases now that have gone on more than a year where phone records requested by a DA have not been obtained, and it's frustrating. But I get frustrated when I think of Robert Kennedy's assassination and how Sirhan could be in jail for the rest of his life when they didn't even have the autopsy report in the trial, because the autopsy report would have shown that he couldn't have shot that senator. So things happen.
There's lots of cases out there that need to be looked at. There's no doubt about that.
But look at this. You've got the prime suspects handing you the evidence they want you to have.
Well, they have things in common. I've never seen a case that has. I've never seen a case where the top suspects have as much to do with we don't like the way this direction is going. We're going to investigate the case ourselves. And that was a bad precedent to allow to happen. They should have just been fought tooth and nail, because what has happened now is the McCann case in England, Portugal, England. And they using some of the same experts, if you will, are doing the same thing. It's a distraction, and it's obscene.
Look at this blank record. All they had to do, once they saw that, and once Thomas, as a detective, was told there were records calls on this phone in the months prior to the December record, which was blank, why couldn't they look at, okay, well, let's see if there were any calls in January on this phone. And then they could have found out, was that the truth? Was the phone lost? Was it ever used again? So many questions about this phone.
Maybe they know it wasn't going to go to trial. Because honestly, by my theory, what good is that? They're not going to be making phone calls around the time of her death. They're not.
How do you know that? How do you know that?
It doesn't fit
they could have
the case.
Well, who knows? They could have called their lawyer. They could have done something.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, I'm assuming they did that.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't lead you down any dark alleys.
No, but the fact they're trying to hide it.
Well, if there was a record of a phone call on that cell phone during the hours they claimed to be asleep while the intruder was murdering their daughter, that would be rather important. And, in fact, the case could have been solved immediately.
Can I make
in my opinion.
Can I make a point?
Yes, Levi, jump in.
Thanks. I don't even think that the Ramseys were asleep, and I think that all you have to do is look at the fact that Patsy Ramsey was wearing the same clothes that she wore when she attended the party, and she was in her makeup. Now, if she had been to bed, don't you think that she would have taken the makeup off? I think that proves that she was not asleep that night.
That's a very good point. Absolutely. Yeah. Once again, Levi, common sense rules over everything. Cold case, we have to move on, but we love you so much, and don't ever leave us, okay?
Well, thank you.
Because your passion and your intelligence is something that we desperately need, so thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to move up. Levi, don't leave us. Cynic, don't leave. Donna, don't leave. I'm going to run to Super Dave here. Now, if you've ever been to Web Sleuths, you know all about Super Dave. He is a master of information and very, very passionate about this case, and we love having him. He's helped keep the case alive with many of the other posters on Web Sleuths. So, Super Dave, as we wrap this show up, do you have anything you'd like to ask Donna or any of us, or do you have a comment there? What do you want to get out there as part of this official record of what the real story is behind the JonBenet Ramsey case?
Well, I got a lot I'd like to get out there, but there's one very big one.
Okay.
I know Donna touched on it, and that was Henry Lee, the grand jury, and the decision not to go forward with an indictment. If you read Steve Thomas's book, and this is actually one thing that everybody from people on our side, like Steve Thomas, Dan Kaplan, Craig Silverman, and people on the other side, like Michael Tracy, Brian Morgan, one of the defense lawyers for Hal Haddon, and actually agree on is that I don't think Alex Hunter ever intended for the grand jury to bring forth an indictment. I think it was just a dog and pony show to get the governor off of his back, because Steve Thomas had resigned in August of 1998, and his resignation made the round, and everybody was pretty much feeling the heat. Like the gaze of the nation had turned toward them, and it was CYA time. And Cold Case talks about the Ramsey's phone records never being subpoenaed. For the love of God, none of the lead investigators or the Ramseys were called.
Exactly, and that's ridiculous.
And Donna,
that's not unusual, and I'll tell you why. Because they would have just taken the fifth. So what's the point? You know, they know they're the ones under that umbrella. So big deal.
But let's talk
I
about.
can tell you by many sources, this was a serious grand jury that was really, and there's nobody who was a better friend to the prosecution of somebody than Alex Hunter. But he didn't get his shot to do it. And
well, but don't you think he didn't ask for the grand jury to vote? Isn't that what everybody's saying here?
Yes, that's what I'm telling you. I'm telling you a piece of information that no one has had before. And Henry Lee was the one who said, don't do it.
And so that's kind of been confirmed tonight, because we've always suspected that. We've always suspected that Alex Hunter stood up and said, thank you very much, you may go.
Right. And by the way, other people no doubt told him that too. Any experienced prosecutor is going to say, pull the plug now.
Yeah, exactly. And then when he came out, he never ever said, the grand jury has taken a vote and refuses to indict. Never put it like that.
The omission was well noticed by us all at the time, and we just never had that answer. But, you know, what was the appropriate thing to do is not go forward, because as we know from Casey Anthony, O.J. Simpson, people who get prosecuted where there's not enough evidence, and you have, high-functioning, well-paid attorneys and experts who live to embarrass prosecutors, you really have to have all your ducks in a row, and it just wasn't ever going to be here. They did not have a clear line of what happened on this case. Not within the police department, not within the DA, not within the media offices across the nation. Everyone said, well, we can't see, we're not sure what happened, so let's go with the Patsy did it bedwetting scenario, which never made any sense. It didn't match the forensic evidence. So you had all the scientists up in arms saying, wait a minute, huh? What? And so if you can't even get a line of consensus within your team, how are you going to go forward? And the Ramseys very wisely, under the wise counsel that they had, stuck together and did not, so you could not have anybody turn on the other person. And without that, you have nothing. And that's where we are now. The only hope, as I see, and it's a remote possibility, but I hope what I've done here tonight will put a bee in someone's bonnet. Somebody knows.
Yeah, but let me ask you this, because this is just,
wait, this is
of
cold
course
case.
they didn't.
Hold on. This is cold case asking Donna Kaufman a question. Go for it.
Thank you. How could they possibly make this case when Alex Hunter is standing between the investigators and the evidence? I mean, the phone records he refused to subpoena, the handing evidence over to the Ramsey lawyers right off the bat, the attitude that he expressed to the investigators for the Boulder Police Department, that he wanted to get the Ramseys' cooperation rather than forcing them to do anything, not taking them in for questioning immediately and separating them. There's so many things that were deliberately not done and done that destroyed this case early on. I totally agree.
Let me tell you that if there had been a conviction of Casey Anthony, many of these same issues would have been used in the appeal. While you made her a suspect without looking at anyone else, why you didn't look at the phone records in a timely way, why you didn't separate, everybody, you didn't grill them, you treated her like a killer instead of a grieving mom. All these things, it's a replay. It's common defense 101.
Oh, the Ramseys wrote the book, and Casey's lawyers read it. I get that.
Guys, I have to move on here. I have to move on here. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I will be cut off because they will just pull the plug on my show here in just a little bit. I just have a couple more questions for a couple of people here. Levi, hang on. I want to go to Cynic. We have the Investigation Discovery ID Rebuttal Forum up now at websleuths.com in the JonBenet Ramsey Forum, and I have to say it could not have been put up without Cynic. I asked him in April if he wanted to get together with me to do a rebuttal, and he said yes, and I got tied up with everything else, and lo and behold, he did all the work. He did it. He just did it. It's just there. It's all, I mean, it is just, it's done. It's perfect. I mean, you couldn't ask for anything more perfect. And so, Cynic, I want to publicly thank you so much for your hard work on that, and it looks beautiful. It really does. It really took Aphrodite Jones and Discovery ID to task. It showed the sloppy reporting, the misinformation, and the lies out and out. Cynic, as we wrap this up, is there anything you would like to add or to ask, or you want to sing a song? What would you like to do?
Well, I would like to say that it was great to be on the show. I would like to add one more thing. One particular case which I consider to be very important in terms of how it reflects on the JonBenet case. And actually, the post is up currently just at Forums for Justice. But I'd just like to quickly mention it. It's a criminal case which is actually still ongoing with a gentleman by the name of Stephen Democritus, who's on trial for killing his former wife.
Mm-hmm.
And in that particular case, the heading I have for the post is what can happen when a careless coroner handles evidence. And it's in that particular case, just a quick overview. In that particular case, there is DNA from 3 unidentified men found in 3 locations under the fingernails of the victim's left hand, on the victim's left hand, and on a cell phone held by the victim. And actually, I'll just cut to the chase here. It turns out there's a headline: Democritus trial mystery DNA identified, and it was actually from a previous decedent.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, exactly. And if that can happen in that case, we have that much unidentified DNA matching in several locations. Is it much of a stretch to consider that that's what may have happened in the Ramsey case?
Absolutely. Beautiful point. Once again, beautiful. Like I said, if I could hire you to clean up my life, I think I will. We'll talk about that off the air. Okay, thank you, Cynic. And let's wrap this up with Levi and Donna Kaufman. Levi, you have been so patient. Thank you so much. And Levi has gotten me out of a couple of jams here at my radio show before, so I want to publicly thank you for that. Is there anything you would like to add, Mr. Levi?
Well, I just think that you mentioned the media coverage. I think that's an important point. And, John Ramsey has done media interviews, Oprah and such, and he only gets asked, softball questions. And I'd like to ask, if it was not an intruder, if it was an intruder, then the murderer is still out there somewhere, and we really don't see him pushing to try to find out who that killer is. I mean, instead they set up a fake foundation. He runs for public office in 2004. You know, we really don't see a concerted effort into finding out who this killer is. Instead, it's all about covering their own butt. They refuse to cooperate in the investigation. They hired high-profile attorneys and a media PR spin team very early on. And I'd also like to ask, you know, John Ramsey, why is it that your wife, Patsy Ramsey, still had her makeup on? Did she not take it off before she went to bed? Did you guys really go to bed that night? Because a lot of people don't think you were. And I don't think the correct questions have been asked by the media to the Ramseys. Everybody said that the media has been very awful to the Ramseys. Well, I think they've gotten pretty slanted coverage and positive coverage from the media in the past 8 years, I would say.
You're absolutely right.
In the beginning, they were a little tough on the Ramseys, but we haven't gotten, tough questions asked to them recently, and I think that needs to be done. And I loved your guest talking about the ransom note. That was very educational, and I thought that this was the best program you've ever put on, Tricia, and I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much, Levi. You are such a sweetheart. Levi Page, everybody, the superhero of Blog Talk Radio. Thank you so much. Okay, Donna, we're going to wrap it up here. We have just a few moments. You said earlier, I'm going to kind of put you on the spot here because I think this is interesting, and that's my job, is to occasionally make you feel uncomfortable. Okay, you said.
Oh, you buy Santa drinks and dinner, but I get put on the hot seat.
That's
okay.
absolutely right. I suck up to other people, and I make other people feel uncomfortable. So here we go. So I get paid the big bucks. Okay. You said that you wanted to put a bug in somebody's ear with this show tonight with the information about, let's repeat this, Henry Lee advising Alex Hunter not to ask the grand jury for a vote, just to say, thank you very much, grand jury. When you're done, send them home. They never vote for an indictment, so he doesn't have to prosecute the case.
Just to be clear, that's just a little cherry on top, the Henry Lee situation. And I have reported that over the years.
Okay.
But it's sort of get lost in the shuffle. But what I'm putting a bug into somebody's ears about is different. Somebody out there did something that was depraved and sexual and sadistic to a child, and overkill and a cover-up, and that particular blueprint has never been used again. Had that ever been done again, the FBI would know about it. Plenty of bells and whistles with people like me would have heard about it, and that has never come forward. So you've got a real pervert out there with a mean streak, an evil, evil person who got away with this. And as we saw in the Casey case, we see parents.
Oh, we see what? We lost you, my dear. Are you there? Oh, my gosh. Is anybody there?
Hey, Tricia, I think that what we see with the Ramsey case in a parallel with the Casey Anthony case is that Casey Anthony putting the finger at her father. And I think if this ever did go to trial, one of the things that we would see is that we would probably see the Ramseys separate from each other and start pointing the finger at each other to get the jury confused, because let's face it, they are the two most suspicious people in this case, John and Patsy Ramsey.
Absolutely. You couldn't ask for, I mean, if you wrote a Hollywood movie and you wanted suspicious people, they would be your characters. And that's
they stuck together during the investigation, but I think if they were ever charged, they would have flipped on each other, and it just would have confused the jury.
Yeah, it's just like
I was waiting for someone to bring that up.
You're exactly right.
Yeah, good point.
Well, Donna was bringing it up, but I think the Ramsey spin team got to her and probably conked her on the head. Now she's laying there unconscious. So I don't know what happened to Donna, but hey, everybody, thank you so much. This show has been. I'm so sorry we had to do it. I'm so sorry that JonBenet was murdered. I'm sorry that there's never been any justice in this case, and I'm sorry we had to do this show. But I'm glad we got the information out there, and we couldn't have done it without you. Now, John Ramsey called people like us what was it? Bored housewives and beer can collectors. And I wear that title with pride. Even though I'm not a bored housewife, I have never collected beer cans. But in other words, John Ramsey was trying to make himself out to be better than us, and that's his arrogance. And it's his arrogance that's going to trip him up someday, and we will find the truth. I don't think any of you are bored, and if you collect beer cans, good for you, because that's hard work. So
hey, Tricia, can I say something real quick?
Absolutely.
Me and you talked about this on my show, but I think that it's interesting now that when the police wanted to interview Burke Ramsey, that Team Ramsey put a stop on that. Why?
Why? Exactly.
It just shows again that they don't want this case to be solved. And listen, I think that the theory that Burke Ramsey, at his age murdered the child is absolutely ridiculous. But I do think that he may know some information. I think that information may incriminate one of his parents, and maybe that's why Team Ramsey doesn't want him to speak.
I think you're absolutely. That's a very logical conclusion, and it's common sense, and that's what this show is about. Why wouldn't he speak to the police? Why did Team Ramsey say no, no, no? Even though he's 21, he could have done it anyway. He chose not to. He chose, obviously, to do what his father wanted him to do. Why is that? Well, somebody is still hiding something, and with any luck, we will keep on keeping on. We'll keep the pressure up, and maybe someday we'll have the truth. Hey, thanks again, everybody. This Web Sleuths Radio edition has been truly amazing, and I appreciate everybody coming on. Next week on Web Sleuths Radio, our guests will be, I have no clue, but I promise you it'll be interesting. It'll be fun. We will discuss true crime, current events, and we will always use common sense. That's what it takes, people. Don't forget, go to websleuths.com, the JonBenet Ramsey Forum. You can find the rebuttal to Aphrodite Jones' pathetic show about the JonBenet Ramsey case right there. Everybody be safe, and we will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 No retreat and no surrender.
Exactly.